I had to tell them no. He made mention of knives. We had a moment to speak. I think to a reporter from San Francisco that
Mrs. Hoagland, how old was your son, and what did he do?
He's 31 years old. He's president of the Bingham Group, a public relations firm in San Francisco with an office in New York.
And have you talked to anybody in the government this evening? Has anybody in the airline or the government been in touch with you?
Well, United Airlines has called me to confirm that Mark was on the flight. The FBI has been in touch with me and has come out. Two of the representatives came out this morning in response to our call to them.
Well, Ms. Hoagland, thank you. Thank you for sharing this with us and with the nation. This is a day for you that we won't even begin to imagine, but I think we're...
I'm glad to be able to share what I have been able to find out.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's Alice Hoagland on the phone from California, we're told. We're told it's Alice Hoagland on the phone from California, the mother of Mark Bingham, one of the passengers on United Airlines Flight 93. Ms. Hoagland says she's been in touch with United Airlines since. It all seems to fit with early reporting that we had heard today about some of the passengers on United 93 managing to talk. She says the air phone, not his cell phone. Forget that many airplanes have air phones now. And there was chaos on the airplane. He was distracted. The phone went dead. And we know that 38 passengers and 7 crew died in this crash in Pennsylvania on an airplane that had, at least according to one or two sources we've spoken today in the Federal Aviation Administration environment, had asked to change its flight plan for Washington before it crashed for reasons we do not understand at this point in Pennsylvania. This has been a day, whether it's on the phone at great distance or closer up at the scene of a disaster, when people have been searching for news and connection and friends and relatives. John Quinones has one such example.
These are children who go to school right across from the Twin Towers. They were evacuated during the chaos. The faces of innocence, worried and frightened. What did you hear?
I heard a big boom.
What happened then?
And it sort of shaked.
Some kids were crying because their mom and dad worked there.
Among the people inside the burning towers, this little girl's father.
I was scared that my dad was still in there.
You still don't know. Her name is Jane Schoenholt, her mother Brenda, and sister Remy.
Well, my husband works in the World Trade Center, so it was more him.
Right across the street.
And she was in the school right down there.
What went through your mind?
I love you very much.
A lot of people I know are dying.
I just want my dad, I want my animals.
Her dad, Steve Schoenholt, runs a restaurant on the concourse level of the Twin Towers.
It's a restaurant.
He spoke to his family by phone this morning after the first explosion.
Why didn't he evacuate?
I do.
Because he thinks he's too tough for those terrorists.
But they haven't heard from their father since.
So let's go find him. Come on.
We follow them for blocks and blocks throughout the disaster zone.
I'm just used to walking over here and just seeing, the Twin Towers. It's scary to see just smoke. And that's it. That's my home, and it's gone.
Just a few blocks from their home,
Everyone back on the sidewalk, please.
were stopped by police.
Fortunately, right now, until we know that it's safe, we're asking everyone to move back.
Now, the people that were evacuated from the World Trade Center, where would they be right now?
Unfortunately, they are all over.
Officer, they're looking for their father who was in the building.
I understand. Unfortunately, my wife is in the building, and I still haven't heard from my wife. So,
On a cell phone, they call to see if Steve has turned up at one of his other restaurants.
Hi, is Steve there? Steve. Yeah, okay.
Does that mean he's gone or is he still alive?
No, she just hasn't heard from him.
They continue their desperate search, past the rubble, past the screaming rescue vehicles, and then more barricades.
Okay, this is a secure location,
You
so
can't
you
go
can
in.
step aside and walk.
Oh.
It's a yellow light.
your location?
How do you feel right now?
I'm scared that my dad, we might not find him. I feel like he's alive. I just want to find him, make sure.
They run into one of their neighbors who points them toward a police command center several blocks away.
And tell them your situation and that they will escort you to your house.
Yes, yes.
Right there at Pier 40.
Van.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's another long walk, and at the end, it once again seems fruitless.
And do you know anything about when we'll be able to get in there to get our animal?
There's nothing here.
But then, as Brenda is in the middle of another desperate phone call trying to find her
Good
husband,
to do that. We'll do it then.
What?
one little happy ending on a day with so much anguish and so much heart.
In the building. I cried the whole way. I saw it coming down.
Oh, no.
In Search of Steve. A happy ending where there have been so few today, and God, I didn't know where that was going for a moment there. And when they encountered the policeman and said they were looking for their father, and he said his wife was in the World Trade Center too, that was very difficult. Mayor Giuliani reports, Mayor of New York City, that some survivors have been pulled from the rubble tonight. And that is a huge relief that some survivors have been pulled from the rubble tonight, a huge relief to all of us, and a relief, too, I'm sure, to Frank Donahue from the American Red Cross, who's a member of the National Disaster Response Team for the Red Cross and came in today from Philadelphia. And you've had experience in earthquakes before, and I thought as you sat down, you suggested there's some similarity here.
Absolutely. Coming into New York today from Philadelphia, the Holland Tunnel, that eerie kind of sound and feeling when I arrived in New York City of literally hundreds and hundreds of firefighters and police standing by, and the smoke that was all over Lower Manhattan reminded me so much of the smoke I saw over Izmit, Turkey 2 years ago when 19,000 people died in that earthquake. And there are many similarities. Tonight I was down there and they were getting phone calls, cell phone calls from the rubble. And it is that kind of experience in an earthquake. And Red Cross is there to provide backup support for the medical staff that are on scene and the disaster workers that are pulling people from the rubble and the medical staff, but to provide relief to them, also to provide mental health support for family members like we just heard from that woman who presumably lost her son. We have Red Cross disaster workers at every airport, at LAX, at Boston's Logan, at Newark, in responding to family members that were waiting for loved ones on those flights today. And of course, Mr. Jennings, you know, the blood supply. We've
talked about it numerous times today. It's very hard to understand. Are you still looking for volunteers across the country to be giving blood?
You know, and I think it's a great reminder to all of us that our country should never be short of blood. We have about 50,000 units of blood right now ready to respond in New York City. But people throughout the countre can give blood by calling 1-800-GIVE-LIFE.
Okay, just do that very slowly. 1-800-GIVE-LIFE.
Right.
You might try to figure that out numerically for some people who want to figure it out numerically. But it was a little difficult today to figure out whether there was an immediate blood shortage here, even though we know there's blood shortage in the nation as a whole.
Well, as you indicated, you know, as they're pulling people from the rubble over the next couple days, which will continue, that's when the blood will be needed. And again, it's a reminder to all of us that we always need to be ready.
What else does the National Response Team from the Red Cross do? When you say you come in to assist people, what is that?
Today we had disaster vehicles in the neighborhood responding. For example, a gentleman came up to me, had been evacuated from his house and needed his heart medication. So we would make sure we connect him up with hospitals and facility to get him that medication. People will be calling their local Red Cross throughout the United States, trying to find loved ones that were in that building on those airlines. And our local Red Cross here in Greater New York will begin to identify who goes to 13 shelters tonight that the Red Cross is running in Lower Manhattan.
As you were wandered around Lower Manhattan today, how much pressure are the hospitals really under? Hard to get a grasp of that, too.
Again, I believe that, you know, there's the number of people that have actually been pulled, the survivors, are not as many as we'd hope, and so the hospitals...
Not as many yet as we
Correct.
Right.
So the hospitals are not as full as one might think. The number of casualties that have been, you know, taken to hospitals is less than thought at this point, but that's, as you said, I think the next couple of days we'll see more.
And we don't compare this is comparable to an earthquake in some ways, and we had these two huge buildings that collapsed. This is an act of terrorism, as you well know. But how similar is it in terms of your hopefulness having seen what you've seen today, that a rescue operation will at least have some measure of success?
Absolutely. I mean, I think all of us have hope that as many people as we could possibly get from the rubble will be saved. I mean, I've seen in earthquakes people buried a number of days that have come out alive, as you have as well, and that's the hope for all of us. And Red Cross and emergency workers tonight, we're feeding 10,000 folks in Lower Manhattan, disaster workers, and that's their primary job, is to try to help find people over the coming days. So Red Cross will be there with them.
Among the horrifying spectacles today, of course, for all of us, is as people fled in panic from the scene of these disasters, the police and the firemen were on their way in to try to help people going under the way. And those two departments in New York City have suffered grievously.
Absolutely. The loss in the fire and police is significant. It is always the case, I think, when there's a disaster. There's so many people running away, and yet there are people like Red Cross volunteers and fire and police
What's the mood on the street,
moving
Mike?
in. Again, it's a sense of quietness. I think people are stunned. I don't think anyone ever could believe that could happen right here in New York City, and I think people are just stunned. But also New Yorkers have been incredible. As I was driving up here tonight, people knocking on my window, the Red Cross vehicles, saying, I want to be a volunteer, I want to give blood, I want to help. Students from NYU coming up to me begging where they could go and help tonight. So people are responding. People wrapping police fire bands around, those bands, those yellow bands around their arms, helping direct traffic. Just like I saw in Turkey and Izmit. I mean, people respond when people need help.
Well, I very much appreciate you coming and taking the time to talk to us. Frank Donahue from the National Disaster Response Team of the Red Cross, and he has said something important. There it is on your screen here, that no matter where you are in the country is in need of blood, and in these immediate emergencies in outside Washington and in New York, there will be an intense need for blood in the next couple of days. So you can call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE, excuse me, which translates numerically into 1-800-448-3543. Thanks, Mr. Donahue, very much for coming in. Frank Donahue came up from Philadelphia and just telling us what we've heard so many times today, that the mood on the street is utterly mixed, and yet everywhere you go there are people who wish to volunteer. It's interesting, he said, characteristic of the same thing he found at Izmit in Turkey, where they had those terrible earthquakes within a year ago. And it happens everywhere. The earthquake in Mexico City, I remember, same kind of thing. People just spring into action and do what it is that they can do. There are people in the country who may have tried to take advantage of it. I have a note here somewhere about the state of gasoline supplies in the country. A lot of people in the country anxious that somehow these attacks on the states would lead to a shortage of gas supplies, have rushed to fill up. Don't mean to suggest hoard, but have certainly rushed to fill up, and there were certain people in some parts of the country who may or may not have taken advantage of this. But certainly Exxon, Mobil, and BP are two of the large companies which have done what they could tonight in various regions of the country to let people know that there was going to be no shortage of gasoline, no interruption of the oil supply as a result of the attacks today, and urged everybody to keep the price just where it was and not take advantage of your fellow citizens. Now, the economic ramifications of this are immediate, and they are international. And Betsy Stark is still with us after these many hours to give us a summary of the impact that this has had in terms of the globalization in which we now live.
Peter, you're right that this is kind of a cautionary tale on the kind of havoc that can be wreaked on the economy. Not surprisingly, oil prices in the futures market did shoot up today on fears that there could be supply disruptions if there's an escalation of tensions, and particularly if those tensions involve the Middle East, which is a source of so much oil production. And evidence tonight that some gas stations are taking advantage of that fear. In Oklahoma, Mississippi, Missouri, and Michigan, a doubling and tripling of gasoline prices to as much as $5 a gallon. And as you say, consumers fearful that there will be shortages waiting online to fill up. But important to tell you, the American Petroleum Institute says there are no shortages of supply. Refinery production is going strong. And the only place we may expect some supply disruptions are New York City, as you can understand.
Now, on the international financial markets day, the New York Exchange was closed, the American Stock Exchange was closed, and is going to stay closed tomorrow. Can you get some sense of the international ramifications as how people interpret the United States and the American economy in the wake of this?
Peter, as you know, psychology is such a strong element in the way the world looks at the health of markets. And what we had today was a blow not only physically to the heart of the financial district, but also in striking the Twin Towers, a center of finance and commerce in New York City and around the world, a blow to investor confidence in the United States as in its ability to kind of continue to be the economic engine that holds the economy together at a time when not only is the U.S. economy on the verge of recession, but economies around the world are. So there's great anxiety in world markets. Our markets, as you say, will be closed tomorrow, and we won't have an announcement until tomorrow on when they will open up. But
the Japanese markets, I mean, it's now 9 o'clock in the West, a little after midnight in the East, so the Japanese market is open today. There's a market open somewhere, everywhere in the world. What do you see?
Well, what you see is you see investors around the world, their confidence shaken. The Japanese market opened, as you say, a couple hours ago and has gone down about 5-6%. So, that's a bad day, but it's not a crash. I mean, the global financial system has not fallen apart, Peter, but it has been shaken.
Why are the American and New York Stock Exchanges going to stay closed tomorrow? It's interesting how the political establishment, the Congress, has made a very public point of being open and doing business tomorrow. Why not the exchanges here?
Well, some of it has to do with the fact that the New York Stock Exchange is located just a few blocks from where the World Trade Center Twin Towers once stood. So it's going to be difficult in terms of transportation, in terms of safety, in terms of not interfering with the rescue operations and the cleanup of that area to actually get employees down into the stock exchange. And the major financial firms, which operated out of the Twin Towers, out of the World Financial Center across the street from the Twin Towers, have also got some cleaning up to do and some damage assessment to do before they can be back to full operations.
Betsy, just join me in taking a look at your television monitor there. And here is a list of some of the companies which did business in the World Trade Center. Look at Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley had 50 floors in Tower Number 1, 12.5% of the tower owned by Morgan Stanley. Now, we do not know that all of that was devoted to Morgan Stanley investment business. They may have sublet it in some cases to other, because Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, Oppenheimer funds, all who are deeply involved in the international financial community, had offices in there. And 9% of the tower, in Tower 1, of course, is the Port Authority, responsible for the bridges and the tunnels around New York. And they are all those offices, and many of their employees today lost. Anything else to add, Betsy, before we give you a break?
Well, I would point out, there's been some talk today that this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, that in the aftermath of this attack, with markets closed, planes not flying, businesses closed, consumers fearful, maybe glued to their sets, that we could see a drag on the economy that pushes us into recession. But we may also see surprising resilience in the market. So I think we don't want to be premature in saying that only bad things will come out of this in terms of the U.S. economy.
Okay, I much appreciate it, Betsy, because I think one of the things we've experienced today that is much bad as there is today, there is a sense of spirit in the country. You see it reflected to some extent in the various newspaper editorials which are beginning to reach us around the country. And while a great many of them from the East Coast to the West Coast, in the South, in the Midwest, in the Mountain States, are pretty unanimous in saying, as the Arizona Republic did, for example, make no mistake, this is war, and they're almost universal in believing that the United States should attack vigorously anyone whom we can hold, country can hold responsible for people this. And while some, like the Miami Herald and others, do make it clear that what we've imposed are special weaknesses in the United States, they all reaffirm, as we've seen for many days, the strength of the nation as a whole, and the resilient, tried and tested as much as the nation has been today. For the second time today, we have a chance to talk to the former CIA Director, James Woolsey, Mr. Woolsey's in the Washington Bureau now. I think you were at home when I first talked to you this morning, sir. Nice to see you again. Just since we have talked to you today, I assume you've spent a lot of time on the telephone. So what have you learned, and what conclusions, if any, are you coming to this evening?
Well, we touched on this earlier, Peter, but I think that there has already been some rethinking in the United States about the World Trade Center attack in 1993. And the possibility that there may have been Iraqi government involvement in that. There's been an interesting book written by Laurie Milroy on this subject. There's a number of government officials who are interested in it. The Clinton administration seemed to think that the World Trade Center and all of the other terrorist operations were either loose associations of people who came together sort of spontaneously, maybe encouraged by a sermon in a mosque or something, to conduct a terrorist operation, or in the later years of the Clinton administration, it was Osama bin Laden. Very little attention was paid to the possibility that state sponsorship of terror might be alive and well, especially state sponsorship by Iraq. A lot of the rethinking of the World Trade Center bombing of '93 has to do with the identity of Ramzi Youssef, who is in prison out in Colorado. Youssef was possibly, not proven, but possibly involved with Iraqi intelligence. If that rethinking of '93 is accurate, then one very interesting thing about what happened today is that this operation is sort of a combination of Ramzi Youssef's two prior terrorist operations. One against the World Trade Center in '93 with the truck bomb. The other, the attempt to blow up a number of American airliners in the Pacific.
You're talking in terms of modus operandi.
Yes. Yeah. Now, Ramzi Youssef is not sitting out there in solitary confinement in Colorado masterminding all this. If there's an M.O., and this is only suggestive, it's not probative, it does suggest that some of the same type of thinking may have been behind what was going on in '93, '94, '95, and what went on yesterday.
Are you suggesting, Mr. Woolsey, that what we've seen today in terms of these attacks in New York and outside Washington today, an operation that may have been in somebody's mind for a considerable lengthy period, quite a lengthy period of time?
It's possible. It's quite possible that Osama bin Laden was involved in this, and indeed his group did it. But it is also possible that there was someone behind them. And one candidate is the Iraqi government. Outside chance that it was another terrorist group and the Iranian government was involved, I think that's much less likely.
And there's also the possibility at the moment, and forgive me, I mean this in the best, most respectful sense, that you and a whole lot of the rest of us don't really know a darn thing at the moment.
I confess, I have no inside information on this whatsoever. I've been a private citizen for 6.5 years. This is all just reading the press and surmise.
One of the things that caught our attention very much today, in fact, I had an inadvertent set to with Senator Hatch of Utah, who's on the Judiciary Committee, and Barbara Walters talked to Senator John Edwards of North Carolina today. They both gave, can I see Mr. Woolsey, please? Thank you. They both gave the strong impression today that they had talked to officials in the CIA today who said, in the words of Mr. Edwards, Senator Edwards, there'd been real progress made in the very first hours after this thing had occurred, and I express disbelief. What do you...
Well, it's possible that they picked up some intelligence either just before or just after the events that led them to suspect someone or some group, quite possibly Osama bin Laden. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was in it alone.
How good do you think Osama bin Laden is, and how much tendency has there been in the United States government to zero in, to focus in on him, as somebody observed to me earlier today, because we need the face of an enemy?
Well, he's worth several $100 million, and that goes a long way in countries where he's been based in the past, such as Sudan, and has been recently, such as Afghanistan. He has a number of followers. He is dedicated, and he has people who work for him who hate the United States deeply. So there is at least I think, a reasonable chance that on certainly the East African bombings and perhaps some of these other terrorist operations, he has been directly and immediately involved, including the Cole. But it doesn't mean that there's no one behind him working with him or guiding him or suggesting approaches or helping with false identities and travel documents and all the rest. And the prime candidate there would have to be, not proven, but would have to be Iraq, I believe.
Do you sense or do you have any knowledge that bin Laden has been anywhere else but Afghanistan? It is conventionally believed that he is protected by the Taliban government, which has led people like the former Assistant Secretary of State Larry Eagleburger to suggest tonight that the Taliban should be attacked directly by the United States if they're found to be complicit in this.
The Taliban has certainly been harboring him, but they may have been his hotel, not, to mix a metaphor, not the Wizard of Oz behind the scene pulling the levers. That role would far more be likely to be in the hands of Iraq than this very chaotic conservative government of Afghanistan.
I don't expect a former director of the CIA to be particularly critical of the CIA today. But I think we believe that nobody in the United States government or its intelligence agencies knew this was going to happen today or had any kind of an inkling that we have heard a whisper about today. Do you think the CIA and the other intelligence agencies in the country are as good as they need to be?
No, they're not as good as they need to be. I think they're the best in the world, but they're not as good as they need to be, because in this business you have to be perfect. It's like playing goalie on a hockey team with any goal scored against you being absolutely deadly. You have to stop everything. And the CIA and the rest of the intelligence community and the FBI did a good job back around the time of Y2K in stopping several terrorist incidents, and they've stopped a number of others that have not been publicized. But you have to stop them all, and you need enough good intelligence to be able to either stop them or help other people, law enforcement or the military, stop them, and this one was a terrible, terrible tragedy.
Mr. Woolsey, we're grateful for the time that you have given us today and the knowledge that you bring to this subject. Thank you very much. I hope you won't go too far away, or at least we'll know where to find you.
It's good to be with you.
In the hours and the days ahead. I want to now bring in our principal military analyst for many years, Tony Cordesman, who's in our Washington Bureau, and has devoted an enormous amount of time over the years to writing, studying, and publishing about military and terrorism in the Middle East, from Afghanistan all down through the Persian Gulf. Tony, you there?
Yes, I am, Peter.
What are your observations on these discussions we have been having about terrorism and who might be responsible today?
I think the problem is we all know who the usual suspect is. That's Osama bin Laden. We also know that there are three nations that have strong hostile elements: Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And all of these countries could have played some role. What we don't have is any evidence as yet that we know exactly the role that either Osama bin Laden personally played or that any government played, whether it is the Afghan government or the other three governments I've mentioned. More than that, people have talked, I think, rather carelessly about attacking leaders. But how do you find a leader? How do we find Osama bin Laden? If we attack Afghanistan, do we attack a city, a power plant? Because we can't find the theocrats that rule it. They don't live in government buildings, and blowing them up doesn't really get to the leadership. So I think that we've heard a natural reaction, almost overreaction. But what we haven't heard is how we are going to this time attack the leaders responsible when we didn't do this in the case of Beirut or Al-Qober, or for that matter, Pan Am 103.
But Tony, it's clear, I think, to everybody that the bar has been raised higher than it's ever before. This is attack on the U.S. mainland. This has been described in virtually every editorial in the country today. We heard from every politician this is an act of war. And so why should the bar not be raised higher? Why should the country not be thinking of attacking the leaders if they're in any way complicit in these attacks today?
Well, I think we should consider attacking the leaders. That's not the issue. We have to make sure that they are A, guilty, and B, we can actually target them, and we have the means to kill them. And in doing so, we don't simply attack civilians or people who are not guilty. And that is really the problem. And it's one thing to talk about a nation like Afghanistan, which is remarkably unpopular and whose leadership have virtually no supporters. And it is quite another to talk about effectively launching another Gulf War against Iraq, a massive war against Iran, or being caught up in any effort that might involve Syria in the middle of a second intifada when we already face the backlash from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Points well taken, Tony. Let me just try to separate a couple of things out before we let you go on this. You're talking on one hand about an issue of morality and how the United States as a democratic nation will behave, and you're at the same time, it seems to me, talking about tactical operation. Let's just talk tactics for a second. If the President of the United States, are you still there? Decided,
yes,
thank you, can't see you. If the President of the United States decided he was going to launch an attack on, quote, the leadership, unquote, of the Taliban, what would be the chances of success? What effect would it have?
Well, if he announces it, there's a very good chance they'd simply disperse, and we find it almost impossible to find them.
I'm sorry, I take that back. If the President launched an attack, not announced it in public first, of course.
Well, he'd probably have to use aircraft. Cruise missiles aren't really precise or reliable enough. We'd have to put in a major air task force so we could find the target and make sure we could protect the aircraft. To do that, we would have to have some kind of really good real-time intelligence on the ground, because we are talking about leaders that move. And we would have to be sure that in the process, we didn't create a political backlash. It's not simply an issue of morality by killing people who are innocent.
Tony,
which means we have to monitor the attack as it occurs.
Tony, the loss within the last several days of one of Afghanistan's leading anti-Taliban militia leaders, is this an enormous loss to the United States in terms of intelligence inside Afghanistan? He was assassinated and we believe has died, according to the reports out of Afghanistan.
Well, it could be, but we don't know as yet whether there is some other leader, and we don't know whether this movement will survive or actually react to this suicide bombing by being stronger. And we just don't know yet, Peter.
Okay, and last question for now. The Russians, so to show we have half our mind in the Cold War today, the Russians have offered cooperation with their intelligence services in Afghanistan, according to congressional sources tonight, talking to Linda Douglas. Is that a realistic suggestion? Can the United States and Russia cooperate in a meaningful way on terrorism?
I think in some ways we already have been, and oddly enough, we've even talked to the Iranians about terrorism in Afghanistan. There'll be real questions about how good the FIS in Russia really is, but certainly they're going to be very careful. Any information they give us, they're going to have been checking out. They're not going to be embarrassed if they can possibly avoid it.
Thank you very much, Tony. I really appreciate it. Tony Kordersman, who's been our longtime military analyst, and I said spends an enormous amount of time producing enormous amount of material for us to absorb on this extraordinarily complicated issue. We're also joined briefly by ABC's Judith Kipper, who is in our Washington bureau as well, and I don't doubt, knowing Judith Kipper, who's worked for us for many years now, that she has been on the phone to every person she knows east of the Mediterranean tonight. What have you learned, Judith?
Well, Peter, it's very interesting. I got a number of emails from friends in the region and journalists and others saying, is the United States now going to take a different tact in the Arab-Israeli conflict? And I was quite surprised by that the first impression was that somehow this would teach us a lesson and that we would be more responsive and more active in trying to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. I think we're really at a crossroads in terms of the Middle Eastern region, if this turns out to be Middle Eastern perpetrators, because it's really going to be a question now of those who really are with us and those who are not, those who can really condemn this, take actions to cooperate, and to move toward eliminating actions against civilians as something that is quasi-acceptable in the region. And it's going to be very hard for a lot of our allies in the Arab world.
And as you listen to as you take the temperature, if you will, of the Middle East today, we've heard people in many of the Middle Eastern nations deeply depressed by this attack. We've heard other people applauded in public. What temperature do you think the thing is running at?
I think people are confused, fearful of retaliation, knowing that more instability and scary things are in front of them. And, you know, the one country that hasn't been mentioned very much is Pakistan, and the U.S. is going to have to reevaluate that relationship if it turns out that this is an Osama bin Laden operation.
Okay, thanks, Judith, very much. Appreciate you coming in as well. You can just feel, I hope and sense, as I do in our coverage, that thanks, Judith, very much. Judith Kipper, who's been in our Washington Bureau. We're going back and forth on this story. We have this enormous human tragedy in one case, which we try to cover, and then this enormous challenge to the United States government. The United States is a nation, but the United States government, and what the United States is going to do about it. What does it know at this point, which appears to be very little. But this tendency, fueled somewhat by the analysts who study the history of international terrorism and by a couple of observations by Senators Graham of North Carolina tonight, and Senator Edwards of North Carolina and Senator Hatch of Utah today, that the CIA at this point has picked up in its monitoring of telephone conversations post the attack some contact between supporters of Osama bin Laden. And it makes sense in most everybody's mind that on an occasion like this, Osama bin Laden is one of the prime suspects, just based on the history of the whole thing. And it's also probably very important for us to remember, as Judith Kipper points out, that the United States in the region and in the Muslim world generally is seen very much as a staunch and unswerving and sometimes indiscriminating ally of Israel. So there are Palestinians and people in the Arab world tonight who believe that if they punish the United States, they're punishing Israel. If they punish the Israelis in their conflict with the Palestinians at the moment, it's also important to punish the United States. But let us come back now to the immediacy of the tragedy. WCVB, ABC's station in Boston, reports tonight that one car has been taken away from Logan Airport in Boston, which there is they want to know whether or not this was a vehicle that was used by one of the people who hijacked an American Airlines or United Airlines plane out of Boston today. Let me just read quickly what it says. We are able to report that it was a Mitsubishi Mirage. It had Virginia plates. We haven't got the license plate number yet. FBI Forensics has the car at an off-site garage. It was actually towed by the state police. Included in the 6 bags of evidence confiscated by the FBI were chairs that the suspected terrorist may have sat in at the airline terminal, and the FBI hopes to pull DNA off the seats in the airport. And there again you see an advance in science in terms of investigating innocence and criminality. We see it in the prison system in the country as a whole, and we see the FBI bringing to bear very quickly the notion that DNA may be a clue here. But as we know, these terrorists got on 2 of these planes in Boston, which were intended to make transcontinental flights, and hijack both of them and head for New York City. And Logan Airport officials now confirm that reporting from ABC's affiliate in Boston, WCVB. And then the officials at Logan Airport, probably reflecting what's going to happen at a lot of airports around the country now tonight. The director of aviation there, Tom Kenton, said he expects that what we're going to get at Logan Airport and certainly others around the country is very quickly instituted a measure of security at the airport similar to that which was in place during the Gulf War. Much greatly reduced access to the side of the airport and much greatly reduced access for people to the passenger areas unless they're flying, and there'll be identification checks. In other words, all of the things that the country had to become accustomed to through the Gulf War may now be put in place again. And we'll get some sense of that when the Congress meets again tomorrow, because we know they're going to pass legislation which will, in the first instance, undoubtedly be in support of the president, who gets very high marks from a lot of people today for that speech that he made in the White House tonight. And beyond the support for the president, there will be legislation, we don't doubt for a second, introduced very quickly to increase the number of resources which are available to counterterrorism in the United States, to some urging of a better coordination among federal agencies, and a greater legal authority. It's the dangerous one, perhaps, in the minds of many Americans, more legal authority for federal agencies to impose on people's freedoms in the country in order to conduct this campaign, this investigation against terrorism. And you saw in our poll tonight that many people agreed it was worth giving up some of their freedoms, at least in the short run, according to a very quick snap poll we took, if it aided the investigation. Back to the people themselves. ABC's Lynn Sherr, who spent an early part of the day very focused on the aircraft and the passengers, has now, I think, Lynn, put together a piece for us on what we do know about people who have been victims today.
Peter, that's right. You remember what President Bush said a little bit earlier today. He said the victims were in airplanes in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Well, here are some of who they were. Olson, former federal prosecutor, more recently a TV commentator, was on American Flight 11 that left Dulles Airport for Los Angeles. She was also the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson. Mrs. Olson called her husband on a cell phone to report that the plane had been hijacked and that at least 2 men had herded the passengers into the rear of the plane. She asked her husband what she should do. Then the plane crashed into the Pentagon. David Angel of Pasadena, California, was one of the creators of Frasier, the TV show. He and his wife Lynn were on American Flight 11 from Boston, the one that crashed into the first World Trade Center tower. There were at least 2 highly placed computer executives among the victims. Daniel Lewin, age 31, was co-founder and chief technical officer of Akamai, an internet infrastructure company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He leaves a wife and 2 sons. Edmund Glazer, 41, of Chatsworth, California, was an executive at MRV Communications, a leading California fiber optics company. He, too, was on the Boston to Los Angeles flight, and he leaves a wife and son. There were 2 prominent members of the professional ice hockey community. Garnet Ace Bailey, director of pro scouting for the Los Angeles Kings hockey team, once a star player himself, was on United 175 headed from Boston to Los Angeles. Ace Bailey was 53 and is survived by his wife and son. On the same flight was Mark Bavitz, an amateur scout for the LA Kings. We know some of the crew members' names on that flight. Al Marchand was a flight attendant from Alamogordo, New Mexico, a former police lieutenant who went to work for United after retiring from police work. He wanted to be a pilot. The man who was the pilot of that flight was Victor Saraceni of Lower Makefield Township, Pennsylvania. A neighbor described him as a great guy with a wife and 2 children. "I'm sure," said the neighbor, "he fought to the end." The pilot of American 11, the first plane to hit the World Trade Center, was John Oganowski, 52, of Massachusetts. And there are more, of course, many, too many more. The airlines are not releasing complete passenger manifests yet, citing security reasons. We'll be hearing a lot more of those names tomorrow. Peter?
Thanks, Lynn, very much. Giving personality and life, in essence, or personality, to the people who were involved in these disasters today. And we'll run that piece again, I think, fairly soon now, because we've been so slow for all the obvious reasons and so unable to attach lives and personalities and families and connections to the people who have suffered and died in these instances. So that's a big step forward. Thanks very much, Lynn. Just 2 remarks quickly about that piece. There was a lot of focus there on Dennis Potvin, who goalkeeper in that game there for Colorado at the moment, and it was not Dennis Potvin, even though you saw a lot of him and his jersey there. It was not Dennis Potvin we were talking about as a victim on one of those aircraft today. And ABC's Pierre Thomas, who covered the FBI and was the first person to raise with us here today the value of the passenger manifests in terms of trying to focus on the perpetrators of this themselves, has proven to be extremely valuable. You hear from Logan Air Base and from Boston tonight that the FBI is all over the airport, all over the car, all over a car that may have been used by the terrorists today in order to give personalities and connections to them as well. So the investigation inches forward. And for the country as a whole, I think some time ago, several hours ago, we ran a fairly lengthy piece which we had put together, which was just simply scenes of today. We take no pleasure in reviewing these scenes for you time and again, except trying to get you closer to the reality of what has actually been happening on the ground. But this has been one of those days when news agencies share information. It's a competitive world, but we have shared information today, giving each other access to material which has helped the country get closer to what has happened. And this is the most recent piece that we get courtesy of CNN, yet one more angle on the attack on the Trade Center today. We have seen that earlier today from a freelance photographer who shot it down below, and now we see it again from another angle today, courtesy of CNN, who shows the power of an aircraft going at speed, absolutely going into one of the two trade towers today. And we thank CNN, and all thank each other for sharing today in a state of national emergency, the information that we have available to each other. Here's a piece we prepared and ran some hours ago, which I hope makes a contribution to the rest of you in the country as to just some of the turmoil that occurred on the ground.
Let's just get back. Get back. You with me, John?
What are we in? 3 World Financial Center. We heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
Give him in. Give him in. You can walk. You can film it. Okay. Take off. Give him in.
As soon as he got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. People jumping out. People just kept jumping and jumping and jumping. And you could still see they were alive because they were flailing around.
A huge explosion now
mask on. Put the mask on. I'm putting it down. Oh my God, there it goes! You okay, officer?
Standing next to One World Trade Center, and then all of a sudden I heard rumbling, and we all started running away from it. The glass like blew out and threw me onto the sidewalk, and I couldn't see for like 20 seconds.
We came from the 82nd floor, and I don't know where my peers are. I don't know. I hope to God they're okay. That's all I can say. I don't know what. We saw a shadow. It looked like a plane. Next thing we know, it was boom, boom, and the floor started shaking.
Right behind us. It's a war. We've been attacked. It's like World War II.
This is so terrible. Can't even look at it. Because all I can see are people. I don't see a building, I see people. People hurt. Children without mothers and fathers tonight.
Well, I don't mean this to be self-serving in terms of news gatherers, but we have a lot to thank camera teams and our own ABC News camera teams and the freelancers today who've contributed to all of this, who've helped us to understand the magnitude of this. You just run through those pictures again, and you appreciate, first of all, the danger, and the immensity of the tragedy. There's the dust everywhere, the dust and the debris everywhere. It could indeed be an earthquake in some rural place, as we've seen in Turkey and Mexico and Armenia and other places, where everything just gets simply buried. It's small compared to what's happened to entire communities in the past, in that it's in a fairly self-contained area it's a very small area in downtown New York City, at the very tip of the island of Manhattan, adjacent to the Hudson River. You see all those papers, which are businesses and lives, going up, and then you hear a woman there just simply saying, all the children tonight who do not have mothers and fathers, and there is the confusion, and there is the panic, and those constant pictures of the firefighters. Mayor Giuliani said not too long ago, confirmed that 3 senior members of the New York Fire Department and indeed had lost their lives, and we have believed for some hours now that as many or perhaps more than 200 firefighters have lost their lives. And you think of what an enormous event when a single firefighter loses his or her life, mostly his life, in any community in the United States, in most parts of which we have volunteer fire departments. And here we have one of the most professional fire departments in the city and has lost 200 members of its force, according to virtually every source we've talked to in this instance. And then there is the exhaustion, because the rescue teams and the salvage teams, whatever you want to call them at the moment, have been working now since 8 o'clock this morning Eastern Time, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning here in New York City, 3 hours earlier, as everybody knows, on the West Coast. But everybody's been engaged in this, which was why probably Governor Pataki and others have said that volunteers in the form of doctors and nurses are going to be needed, because as determined as people in the fire department are, for example, to stay on the job, because in many cases it's their comrades they're trying to rescue or look for, just makes it very clear the level of exhaustion which many firefighters must feel at this moment. ABC's Chris Cuomo has spent part of today focused just on the fire department, and here is his report on what it's been like for firefighters today.
An unprecedented terrorist attack. While thousands fled for safety, New York City firefighters were heading straight into the blast.
As soon as this happened, people were calling on the phone, every station in the city, how can I help, how can I help?
But with buildings of this size and fires of this magnitude, on this day, even their best wasn't enough.
We tried our best, and it was just too much. It was unbelievable. For me, it was.
When the towers showed signs of collapsing, they scrambled to escape. Most made it, but some couldn't get out fast enough. Exactly how many, we may not know for days.
Firehouse.
But what about the others? At this station, calls started pouring in.
Unfortunately, we don't really have much to tell them.
In all the chaos, there would be no quick answers, just firefighters looking for their lost brothers.
Get our brothers. Get our brothers. A couple brothers are also trapped down there.
It's a scene of frustration and fear. Trucks as far as the eye can see, blocked from going back, and a triage center already seeing too many firefighters.
Have you ever heard of an incident where so many firemen and so many policemen were hurt?
No, and I used to work at EMS many years ago, and no. I mean, firemen were coming in and telling us that there were 3 rescue companies that never made it out.
As of tonight, as many as 200 firefighters are feared to be dead. Many are missing, and still, the rescue effort has barely begun.
Chris Cuomo on what it's like being firefighters today. There's no way we can catch you up on a lot of news, but I want to go back to an earlier point of day. We have been confused, not to mention concerned, about what happened to United Flight 93. This is the one that crashed in rural Pennsylvania earlier today, with 38 passengers and 7 crew members on the board. And this, we learned subsequently, was an airplane that had asked for a change of flight plan and was seeking a flight plan to go in the direction of Washington. And this raised very quickly the question of what actually happened to this aircraft. And the Pentagon denied very early on that this aircraft was in fact shot down by the U.S. military as the only way to prevent it from flying in the direction of Washington. Our investigative team has worked very, very hard on this all day today, and I must tell you at this moment that this is still an open question, very much an open question, as to what happened to United Airlines Flight 93, which crashed for no reason that we are able to grasp definitively in rural Pennsylvania. But we do know that the Pentagon denied earlier today that to John McWethy, who was at the Pentagon, our Pentagon correspondent for much of the day, that the U.S. military was involved in any way in an attack on this aircraft. It is still, I have to tell you, an open question. And there is, of course, the question, paramount in the investigation at the moment, about the passengers on the 2 aircraft which were hijacked by terrorists out of Boston, and whether or not some of the passengers on that board are associates of Osama bin Laden. And we have not been able to confirm that yet, but it is certainly a direction in which this investigation is going at the moment. And there is a possibility, all in the realm of yet to be firmed up. There is a possibility that some of these individuals on these aircraft were on what are called watch lists to be arrested if they, or whenever they tried to enter the United States. An open question at the moment, but we've had tremendous help today from our investigative team in terms of trying to pin these things actually down. I simply leave you with 2 open questions at the moment: the fate of United Airlines Flight 93 and the identity and affiliation of at least 4 of the passengers on board the 2 aircrafts which were hijacked out of Boston earlier today. And here's the kind of thing we hate to hear and we hate to report. And any number of officials today have spoken about that. And that is people in the country giving vent to prejudice to members of the Muslim community in the United States. ABC's Deborah Amos reports, who's been stranded in Miami tonight, because everybody in the United States is stranded if they're trying to go anywhere else, reports that there have already been threats there to the Islamic Center in Miami. There are major Islamic centers in many major American cities, now a growing Muslim population in the United States, and there have been threats to the Islamic Center. 7,500 Muslims live in South Florida, and we can only echo in the loudest possible, most obvious terms today that anybody in the United States who gives vent to their prejudice against their fellow citizens tonight, whomever they may be, is, well, fairly evident in what the public officials, including Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki here in New York, have said today, and which everybody in Washington will surely express at the moment. You do not blame communities for the acts of individuals, period. Mayor Giuliani has confirmed for us that senior members of the fire department were killed. John McWethy reports from outside the Pentagon tonight, when he was on duty there, that a member of the Arlington Fire Department believed that maybe 800 people would have died in the attack on the Pentagon. And we have not been able to grasp the dimension in terms of numbers of the people who had died in the attack on the trade towers. But I remind you of what Mayor Giuliani said earlier today, which is a qualitative, not a quantitative answer. When we find out the numbers, it will be more than we can bear. And any loss of life is more than the country wants to bear at the moment, but there's a hint there, I think, from Mayor Giuliani that the number of casualties among the 50,000 people who work at the trade tower on a daily basis, trade towers on a daily basis, may be high, but we do not know how high. And as we try to grasp what the rest of the nation is feeling, whether it's in Los Angeles or Seattle, we rely on our reporters to give us what they can get. You can't get in the hearts and minds of everybody on an occasion like this, but Brian Rooney has a report for us first from Los Angeles International Airport, which may contain some of that Here's his report from Los Angeles.
Here at one of the busiest airports in the world, the planes are all grounded. For a while, some passengers attempted to rebook flights. Then all of them were ordered to leave. The terminals are empty.
We're evacuating all terminals and we're stopping traffic all over.
Los Angeles International was the destination for 3 of the 4 airliners that crashed today. But there has been no official word here about who was on board. By mid-morning, several relatives or friends of passengers on those planes arrived at the airport.
Take these 2 family members up to 42A.
They were quickly led away by airline employees. Security is at its highest, even while the airport is completely closed. The terminals are flooded with police and FBI officers looking for the slightest thing out of order. About noon, someone discovered something suspicious, and the bomb squad was called in. Reporters were herded away, and it turned out to be a false alarm. The airport is sealed off. The only sounds are the recorded passenger announcements, which continue to run over the loudspeakers, and the echo of police dogs barking in the empty walkways. Brian Rooney, ABC News, Los Angeles.
A similar report in that we're seeking what's happening in the various other communities around the country which are affected in many ways, partly because everybody in the country has got some connection emotionally or directly to the people involved in this tragedy today, comes to us from Neil Karlinski, our reporter who's based in Seattle.
Far from the violence, in Seattle, a Navy frigate armed with anti-aircraft weapons steamed into position near downtown in Elliott Bay. Throughout this city, life as normal simply stopped.
They came on and said that they were evacuating and please leave immediately.
Downtown, several buildings were evacuated. Even the city's famous Space Needle was closed indefinitely for fear it too could be a target. Children were kept in school, but the day was anything but normal as the smallest of students tried to understand what was happening. On the water, ferry service, on alert for car bombs, stopped service to all but individual passengers.
I asked the American people to join me.
Many of those who saw the images before leaving work, like this woman, stayed home, disgusted by the pictures before them.
I just woke up to it. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't believe it. I have so many friends in New York, and it's just...
It's going to be a couple minutes. We'll be over to help you, okay?
Others, desperate to help any way possible, simply flooded blood banks.
Because I had to do something.
You just feel so helpless, and this is about all you can do, is come and donate blood.
On the streets, churches opened their doors for people to do the only other thing many could immediately think of: pray. This man came in off the street.
Pearl Harbor pales in what's happened today.
There will be more prayers, blood donations, and help of all kinds in the days, weeks, and months to come. As in the rest of the country, no one knows when this city, so far from the tragedy, will again return to normal. Neil Karlinski, ABC News, Seattle.
So far from the tragedy, and yet, of course, so close. And Neil Karlinski puts his finger on something that we've talked about earlier today, again, that all across the country, in every part of the country, people just went into their local churches and said a prayer for the people who have been caught at the center of this maelstrom in the country today. And then you see a picture of the Space Needle in Seattle, which is a reminder to us that from one end of the country to the other, and overseas as well today, installations, government buildings, schools, whatever, theme parks were closed because and malls were closed because they were deemed to be vulnerable in what was certainly a concerted attack on the United States in at least 3 locations, and may have been greater, and we just had no knowledge of this, only the dreadful anticipation that something worse was going to happen, something more was going to happen as the day went by. And so all across the country today, the public has been engaged in a very intimate way, no matter, as Neil Karlinski says, how far they were away from New York City or from the Pentagon outside Washington, or the tragedy which involved United Airlines Flight 93, which crashed in rural Pennsylvania. And as I recall my figures, Lynn Scher, who did a computation for us, believes that more than 260 people died on the aircraft alone, passengers and crew. We talked to the mother again to our surprise, talked to the mother of one of the passengers, Jeff Bingham, I think, or Brigham, his name was, on board the aircraft that crashed in Pennsylvania, who said that he had called at this moment of astonishing peril to say that he loved the members of his family. And they had said that they loved him, and he'd called on the air phone on board the plane. Other people had managed to call on cell phone, including the wife of the Solicitor General, who called and told her husband, the Solicitor General, Ted Olson, what was going on board the aircraft as that airplane rushed toward its attack on the Pentagon. So the technological age has enabled people to have this communication in the worst moments of crisis. And the young man, 41 years old, I think he was, 31 years old, on board the United Airlines flight, who was, his mother said, how she managed to talk to us is quite beyond us, was clearly, she thought, distracted at the time, and the phone went dead. And we, of course, know what happened to that aircraft. Is Lisa Stark with us in Seattle?
I am here, Peter.
Hey, Lisa, thanks for being with us. You've been with us for a very long day. You've heard much of what we've said today, and you have reported much of what we know about the general state of aviation in the country, these 4 planes and air traffic. Do you mind running through it once more for us before we give you a break, which I think you must need very much?
Running through what we know about the day, Peter?
Let's divide it in two. Let's divide it. Let's start with the aircraft themselves, the 4 aircraft that are involved, American, United Airlines, and then we'll come back, if we may, to those airplanes are all over Canada tonight, and passengers just stranded. And I know you prepared a piece for us as well.
I will. We'll go to that in a minute. Let me just tell you that overall we believe 266 people were on board the 4 airplanes, passenger and crew members. As you know, 2 American planes, 2 United planes departing from 3 airports on the East Coast, all bound for the West Coast, presumably all carrying full loads of fuel for the long trip across country, which would have made them much more deadly incendiary devices in their own, obviously. And I want to bring you up to date now with the piece we've prepared about what we know about how this horrible day progressed.
The first plane to crash into the Twin Towers was this Boeing 767, American Airlines Flight 11. The plane with 92 passengers and crew left Boston around 8 a.m., heading for Los Angeles. About a half hour into the flight, it made a hard left turn over upstate New York. There were violent changes in airspeed. The plane turned and headed toward Manhattan. It slowed and aimed right for the World Trade Tower. At the same time, this United 767, Flight 175, 65 people on board, also going from Boston to Los Angeles, is flying over Massachusetts. It turns toward New Jersey. The jet then makes a U-turn over the state, comes toward Manhattan from the south over Staten Island. It slams into the second World Trade Tower. Both planes were in the air about 45 minutes. Even before the towers are hit, this American Airlines 757, Flight 77, has left Washington's Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles. It's believed the plane was in the air for over an hour before it destroyed a section of the Pentagon. This is all that's left of United Airlines Flight 93. It left Newark bound for San Francisco. It appears hijackers took control somewhere over Cleveland. The plane took a hard turn to the south. Then someone in the cockpit radioed that the plane wanted to change flight plans and head to Washington, D.C. It never made it, disappearing from radar, crashing south of Pittsburgh. As the hijackings unfolded, passengers on at least 2 of the jets made cell phone calls, warning of hijackers armed with knives. And a flight attendant on the American Airlines plane that hit one of the Twin Towers called the airline's operations center to report 2 flight attendants had been stabbed. Hijackers had broken into the flight deck. The flight attendant also identified the seat number of one of the hijackers. ABC's aviation analyst believes at the end, the hijackers, not the pilots, were flying the planes.
There were pilots on board those airplanes of some sort, people who were sufficiently trained to be able to handle those controls and do what was done here.
Just before 9:30 in the morning, the Federal Aviation Administration took an unprecedented step, ordering a nationwide halt to all air travel. All planes on the ground stayed there. Planes already in the air continued on. They were all on the ground by mid-afternoon. One critical question: how did the hijackers and their weapons get on board the planes? 2 of the jets departed from Boston. The director of the Port Authority there defended the security system.
We have a very high security standard here. We consider ourselves as secure, if not more secure, than any other airport in the United States.
But numerous government reports over the last decade have found significant security lapses at many of the nation's major airports.
U.S. airports have a terrible security problem, and just asking grandma if she's packed her own bag isn't going to fix that problem. It's more than just the passenger checkpoint. It's the whole perimeter of the airport and all the people that go on and off. And the FAA, no matter what they tell you, has done a terrible job at that.
Aviation experts say it is likely the air transportation system in America will be changed forever by today's tragedies.
Now, of course, what security lapses there were, we do not know at this point. That will be a question that is being asked and will hopefully be answered in the days ahead. Peter, we do know that the Federal Aviation Administration is planning at this time to resume flights again at noon on Wednesday, noon Eastern time on Wednesday. No doubt it will be a gradual buildup. We know already from the Secretary of Transportation, Norm Mineta, that there will be no curbside check-in allowed of baggage. You will see a lot more officers in the airports. People will be stopped at random and asked to show their identification. No doubt there will be additional security measures that we will never see. And as I had reported earlier, there is also some talk about ramping up the Sky Marshal program. That program does exist, but they could expand it and have Sky Marshals fly on additional airplanes. That has also been under discussion in Washington today. So the folks I have talked with say, at least in the short term, don't expect any of the usual ease, really, at which we get into the airports and get on the airplanes. And I think probably passengers would be more relieved than frustrated by that at this point.
Lisa, thank you very much, A, for that report, and B, for your reporting all day. And what happened, we've seen this happen before, there is an instant reaction to disaster, and security gets very much tougher in the short run, and then it just gets lax. In part, do I understand correctly, there's a huge turnover in security staffs at the airport? I saw one quote today, up to 400% a year. It pays less to be a security guard in an airport than it does at the McDonald's.
It is not a very glamorous job, certainly. It is a tough job. It is a tedious and boring job, as you can well imagine, and it does not pay well. Turnover is exceedingly high. At the Boston airport, for example, where 2 of the planes departed from today, from about 1998 to 1999, their turnover in security screeners was over 200%. At Dulles Airport, the security turnover in screeners over 90%. It's a serious problem. It's one that a number of studies throughout the years have pointed out, and obviously that will be looked at again in the light of what has happened with these 4 airplanes.
And I was looking at a quote today from Chris Yates, who's the editor of Jane's Aviation Security. Jane's widely recognized as being very good about weapons and security, says in a quote here, tests have revealed repeatedly that staff conducting airport security tests just fail them on a routine basis. Is that your experience as well?
The Department of Transportation Inspector General has run a number of checks. Even the FAA do sort of random checks where they try to slip things through security, and inevitably things do get through. Another thing we should mention, Peter, we had reports today, as you know, that it appeared that there were at least some sort of knives on the plane. We heard that flight attendants were stabbed. We had heard a report from Barbara Olson, who was on the flight that went into the Pentagon, that the hijackers on that plane were armed with box cutters. And we should point out that under FAA guidelines, under the rules, you are allowed to bring a knife on a plane if the blade is 4 inches or smaller. They're making allowances for pocket knives, even things like nail files. Now, the FAA tells us that airlines and state and local authorities can issue tighter regulations, but the federal guideline is that it's all right, that it is allowed to go on a plane with a knife with a 4-inch blade or less. We don't know, of course, what devices actually were on the planes.
It really does stick in my mind. The aviation, the security spokesman at Logan Airport saying he thinks his airport has the best security in the United States, certainly breached today. Let me talk to you now about aircraft which are stranded outside the United States. I gather that from eastern to western Canada tonight, the Canadian airports are littered with operating aircraft and the Canadian cities, large and small, are crowded with international travelers, and a large number of them Americans trying to get somewhere, who are stranded in Canada tonight.
I believe there were about 120 flights, if my numbers are correct, that ended up touching down in Canada that were bound for the United States. The international flights were the ones that were diverted primarily to Canadian airspace. Those people, as you mentioned, are stranded. No doubt they will be some of the ones that will hopefully be able to get back on those planes and get where they were going tomorrow. I should mention, Peter, that whenever we have any kind of a weather disaster, for example, that slows air travel, thunderstorms, even a big snowstorm, it takes 3, 4, 5 days really for the system to even get back up and running. I mean, we're talking about 36,000 to 40,000 flights every day in the United States. So I would anticipate that it will take perhaps even longer to get the system back up, because everything is just shut down and they're starting from ground zero really to try to get operations back up again. And again, security, as you would expect, no doubt will be very, very tight when the system does get back up and running.
And let's talk very briefly about the Air Marshals Program. The Air Marshals Program, my recollection is, came into being 15, 20 years ago when hijackings began to occur on a pretty regular basis to Cuba. Nobody got hurt. The plane got hijacked to Cuba. Passengers always came home. But the Air Marshal Program, I think, was introduced at that time. You said it's still in place. How active is it?
The FAA won't say. We have asked them today repeatedly, well, how often do air marshals get on planes? How often do they really fly on flights? And they say that's a security issue. We can't tell you that. So we don't really know how active it is. The sense is that if they were to bring it back, it would be in a much more active fashion, that these air marshals would be flying on many more additional flights. But again, this is all hush-hush, as you can imagine, for security reasons. So I can't even tell you how active the program is today, just that it is still in existence, and air marshals do fly on flights in the United States at any given time.
Thanks very much, Lisa Stark. You've done a wonderful job for us today under the saddest and worst of circumstances, and we're very grateful to you. I must tell you, this Air Marshal Program is very much in existence in the Middle East. I think everybody who pays any attention to air travel knows that El Al, the Israeli airline, is one of the most secure airlines on which to fly. Other airlines of Arab nations at various stages have certainly had armed security on board. I once flew on a Royal Jordanian aircraft from Jordan to Beirut, which is only 50 minutes away. Somebody made a flip observation about hijacking, and within seconds we all had semi-automatic weapons pointed at our heads by security officials who appeared from nowhere. So in various parts of the world, so certainly true on Soviet and subsequently perhaps on Russian airlines, security is present or not present, depending on the mindset of the government in question at the time. But there's always been something of a feeling that the risk to passengers was huge if there was going to be a gunfight on board an aircraft involving terrorists, hijackers, and an otherwise innocent traveling public. So it's been a fairly controversial program almost since the beginning. I want to talk now to our principal aviation analyst, John Nance. We've talked to John several times today. Remind me, John, you're also in Seattle, right? Now, where are you?
That's correct. Tacoma, actually.
You're in Tacoma, Washington, which I think is your home, as I recall. And I've seen subsequent reporting today which confirms that which you were so eloquent about this morning, or so particular about this morning, that it is not very difficult to fly a 757 or a 767, or at least on the short-term basis to get an aircraft directed where you want it to do, even if you're a rank amateur. Can you go through that again for us?
Yes. I missed the last part of the question.
Well, just how,
Peter, I'm sorry.
I apologize, windy question, but that it is possible, without a great deal of experience, to get a 757 or a 767 to go where you want it to go, even if you're an amateur, if you're going to go a short distance, that these are basically easy and similar aircraft to fly.
Once it's in the air, that's correct. However, When you take a look at the picture of the 767 going into the building there in the World Trade Center, Peter, what you see is an aircraft that's in a bank that's being manipulated rather deftly to get it right on target. And the fact that we had both these airplanes hit on target suggests to me that we had fairly experienced pilots of one sort or another in that terrorist group at the controls of that airplane. But is it possible that they could be more amateurish and just guiding it maybe with the experience only in a single engine aircraft? Yes, it is within the realm of possibility.
I think I heard one airline captain say today that with 3 or 4 months experience only, you could actually get a license which would qualify you to fly one of these aircraft, or at least, as he said, it's very, very easy to aim the plane.
It is, if you've had some experience on the controls. It does not feel like a small single-engine aircraft, so there is a bit of a difference there. But I think what I would come back to is this, that if somebody were planning to do this, and obviously somebody planned very well, they're not going to want to take a chance that maybe somebody isn't going to, the person at the controls that they put there, their terrorist, is not going to hit the building. They're going to want some training, and that's where I think we can probably follow that string. There's something else that, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about that you brought up a little while ago, and I thought it was very interesting. You're talking about Flight 93 and the question about why it went down there in Pennsylvania and that we don't know the cause. And the fact that, of course, the government says, the military says tonight that they did not shoot it down. There are still two possibilities, and we don't really have a clear track on this. One, the Associated Press reported several hours ago that in one of the cell phone calls from that airplane, from a passenger, the passenger was talking about the circumstances of the hijacking, and at a certain point he said, wait a minute, there's a puff of smoke out on one of the wings, or a puff of white smoke, and then he said, we're going down. Exactly what sequence that's in, I don't know, but apparently that call was made to a 911 center, and I assume that we'll be able to get that later on. Now, if that's true, that's a very great puzzle, Peter, because there is nothing that you can do in the cockpit that's going to create a puff of smoke on the wing, and that raises the possibility of some outside force, i.e. a fighter shooting at it. By the same token, we have this as the only one of the 4 airplanes that made a sudden turn and requested a change in direction. The other 3, according to Lisa, we don't have any information that they made any request of air traffic control. The 4th one did. And that would indicate possibly, it could have been one of the hijackers, but it indicates possibly that one of the pilots was allowed to stay functional long enough to agree to take the plane back to Washington. He would not have had any idea what they were going to do or wherever it was headed. And that at some point in time, that still remaining pilot or pilots got into a fight, and that could have led, very much as in Egypt Air, to a tussle in the cockpit which lost control. So we've got really a dichotomy.
Just remind people about Egypt Air. There's a long debate about whether Egypt Air crashed as the willful act of a pilot. Was there a struggle on board with the Egyptian pilot trying to force the aircraft down, other people trying to resist? It is possible that in every instance today there was a struggle in the cockpit before someone got their hands on the controls and went directly for their targets.
And I think I'm not only echoing my own feelings, but also that of the NTSB when I say that the Egyptian government, to the contrary notwithstanding, there really is no other scenario whatsoever that fits the Egypt Air disaster of over a year ago, except that the first officer intended to put that airplane into the water, and ultimately, despite the efforts of the captain to stop him, succeeded.
Now, in terms of access to the cockpit today, it is, we all get on airplanes and we go over, and we now know that in this age, the cockpit door is always locked. The stewardess goes up and has a code, knocks 2 or 3 times, or whatever she does, sometimes has a punch-in security code in order to get the door open. Not difficult to bust through that door, though, if you're determined enough.
No, it isn't difficult, Peter, and the reason that it isn't is because if we made that door too sturdy and we ended up with a rapid decompression, would cause structural problems to the airplane. As a matter of fact, in some of the doors in some of the aircraft, like 737s, there are actually pressure blowout panels on the door that would respond to a pressure change. And those could be, in certain circumstances, removed more easily than we'd like. You can't put a bank vault door up there. Part of the problem is simply the pressure vessel of the aircraft. So a determined individual is going to be able to get through that door. And we've had 2 instances, as a matter of fact, in the past number of years where big burly people, both of them deranged in one form or another, broke through just with the force of their own body. I think both of those instances were in 737s.
John, you have worked so many investigations for us over the years, and you have the added advantage that few people do of being a commercial airline pilot and know what it's like in the cockpit. And in so many instances, we've actually resolved the issue of what has happened. Ultimately, we've learned what we really believe happened. What's your instinct about today? Are we ever going to learn what really happened on board those airplanes?
Peter, I think we will, at least in 2 of the 4 cases. I think the one in Pennsylvania is going to yield the voice recorder and the cockpit, or rather the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder rather easily, given the confined condition of the crash site. I think because of the Pentagon situation, we will find those recorders as well. There is so much debris on the World Trade Center site. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be simply fortuitous if those recorders are covered anytime soon. I think eventually they will be, but probably not soon. And when they are, they're able to withstand a tremendous amount of force and heat and all sorts of disastrous impacts. So I would say that we probably eventually will know precisely what went on in terms of voice in that cockpit
and does
in
this,
all 4 cases.
I apologize for the interruption. Does this apply to the cockpit voice recorder or just to the black box recorder which records the mechanical goings-on of the aircraft?
Both actually. They're both in the same location. They're powered the same way. They are in 2 separate orange boxes in the tail end of the airplane, and they both have the same degree of survivability.
That was the question I wanted to answer. The cockpit voice recorder does have the same degree of survivability as do the black boxes, which have time and again revealed information about tragedies in the air.
Not only that, Peter, but some of the later models are actually solid state. They don't even have any moving parts, and they can withstand, I believe it's up to 800 G-forces.
Okay. John, anything you want to add at this particular point?
Well, I guess one thing that's probably a little bit out of the area of expertise, but just to echo some of the other things that have been said today, you know, this is an attack on the United States, but it's also an attack on humanity. I feel this very greatly in several different veins, not only as a citizen, but as an Air Force officer, reservist, and certainly as a member of the airline community, which has been so sorely represented in this fiasco. And I guess one other thing, if you'll permit me, Peter, and that was about the comments that we've made in regard to security. This is something that a lot of us have known about and quite frankly been very upset about for a long time, is that if we're going to have screening in our airports, and we're going to make the pretense that this is going to be a useful thing, and we don't know whether or not they got through this screening or they plan to go through it or not. We don't know whether there was a failure or if this is simply the system. But we need to have federal employees, in my opinion, not scattered bunches of employees working for different airlines who are paying bottom dollar. We need a standardized, well-trained federal force of people. If we're going to do it, we need to standardize it nationwide. And this has really been, and I'm sorry, but I have to use the word, an absurd excuse for a system for a long time. That's without reference to whether or not that had anything to do with today's terrorist attacks. In other words, whether people got past that system or not.
John Nance, thank you very much. It is very difficult. Thank you very much, John. It is just simply difficult and very much out of the ordinary for commentators, analysts, reporters to step outside the roles they have to and do on occasions like this. And I think John Nance speaks for a great many people who are covering this story today, are having to analyze the various dimensions of it. You want to stand outside it and be a human being for just a moment and say what you feel about this, and our jobs do tend to mitigate against that. Now, we've some other elements of the country that we want to pick up. At first, I want to go downtown to Bill Blakemore, downtown New York, where Bill is still there. Bill, just bring us up to date on the latest that you know.
Well, Peter, we're finally beginning to see a great deal of movement with the search and rescue operations. There's been an enormous amount of traffic going past us here. Here's another ambulance coming out. We've seen heavy machinery moving in and out. They're beginning to move some of the rubble around the periphery of the base of the trade towers. And there's a little bit of good news. Mayor Giuliani has said that they've pulled 2 Port Authority police officers alive from the rubble. That was a short while ago. But that's around the edges of the base of the trade towers. We can also see that there's still a fair amount of smoke and heat coming from what was left of the base of the trade towers themselves, and they're still trying to cool that down. It'll be morning before they can get any closer to that. We've been watching a number of the rescue workers moving past us here, some of them looking completely exhausted and covered with dust. One was telling a small crowd here just a short time ago how depressing it was to dig down through 10 feet of ash and come to nothing more but more twisted metal, which we can see down here at the end of the street. Sometimes when the smoke clears, there's still 1 or 2 buildings on fire. However, the beginning of the search and rescue operation is underway, and the morning should reveal a lot more.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much for that contribution, making the point that it's taken 12 hours, more than 12 hours, before the search and rescue operation can really get underway in earnest. And when dark settled over New York City, days, as we pointed out, getting shorter in every part of the country now, lights were brought in from New Jersey and from Connecticut so that that eerie atmosphere that you've seen on prior disasters, though never one of this magnitude in the country and in others, begins to take hold. But it does enable search and rescue operations to go on through the night, and the National Guard, I think it was the Air National Guard from New Jersey, brought in a lot of lights to the New York scenes. Meanwhile, we try to have some appreciation of the mood elsewhere in the country, as well as here. But just take a look. Look at the faces and the demeanor of these people who have worked in a state of their own shock, perhaps. And beyond them in the distance tonight, it'll be very hard for any of us to forget that last skeletal piece, looking like a piece of architecture, which of course it is, there in the distance as the shifts change tonight, of the front of one of the trade towers. It's the only thing that is left standing, to the best of our knowledge, is a piece of the building which is at one of its entrances on the west side of the building facing the Hudson River, that last skeleton of the doorway, of the main doorway that stands there stretched out into the night as this reminder of all of the tragedy that occurred behind it and now below it. That's what it looked like this morning on the right, and that is what it looked like before the sun set here in New York today. Let's go to Chris Bury, who has reported today on the mood in Memphis, Tennessee.
Like so many places, this city of just under 1 million along the Mississippi River was in mourning and on edge. Downtown, the city's tallest buildings were evacuated just in case. Government offices closed early. Even Beale Street, the famous Memphis strip of jazz and blues joints, was all but deserted.
It was all just scary to me, and thinking about Memphis being, to me, a major city. I mean, could we be next?
Here at the Memphis airport, a major regional hub for Northwest Airlines, hundreds of stranded passengers had been diverted from other destinations. Indeed, many of them were in the air, on their way to other cities when the planes they were in were ordered to land here at Memphis.
So we landed and actually got to the gate before we really knew what was going on. And they'd assured everybody that everybody was safe and the plane was okay and we were in no danger, but they did not tell us why we were being pulled from the air.
With all domestic air traffic shut down, every single terminal screen here told the same story. In Memphis alone, more than 500 flights were canceled. The airlines scrambled to find enough buses for passengers headed to cities as far away as Dallas and New Orleans. Home of Federal Express, Memphis normally handles more air cargo than any place in the world. Now its planes are frozen on the field, awaiting trucks to carry their contents. The tragedies touched Memphis in more personal ways, of course. This woman's cousin works at the World Trade Center.
I was at work when I heard, and we turned on television ahead, and been trying to call ever since, and the lines are busy, can't get any word, from anybody, so. And I mean, when I saw the first tower go down, I just started crying because I knew.
So even Memphis, so geographically removed from New York and Washington, clearly felt the aftershocks, driving home the point that no American city is an island in today's reign of terror. Chris Bury, ABC News, Memphis.
The perfectly apt closing reminds us, as we've said so many times today, that this is a national tragedy, and Chris Bury reminding us, and many people may have thought it when the entire aviation system came to a halt today, of course, that FedEx is this important hub for FedEx aircraft that travel all over the country. Much of the FedEx material, as do other transportation services, mail services, go through a central hub. And this is a reminder of the economic effect on the country today, because as Lisa Stark told us a little while ago, the Federal Aviation Administration is not going to let the aviation system get up and running again in the United States. And this may also apply to Canada, though we're not sure at this point until some point about noon tomorrow. And as Betsy Stark, our business reporter, told us any number of times today, the commercial, it's like throwing a rock in the middle of a pond, and it just spreads out all over the country in terms of emotion, in terms of commerce. And now we realize across the world in an era of globalization that commerce has been interrupted by this terrorist attack on the United States today, as well as all of the human tragedy that has occurred here. And it's not possible, we recognize, for us to grasp the mood of the country as a whole. So we can only do it bit by bit. And here is another contribution to that by ABC's Chris Como.
As New York and Washington were hit, people everywhere suddenly felt vulnerable. Chicago shut down, its high-rises evacuated.
Very uneasy. I wanted to get out of there.
Its citizens trying to go home.
It just seems like they're targeting the big cities, and you just never know what's going to happen, and it's just scary.
In Minnesota, the Mall of America closed, and everywhere flights were diverted from the U.S. This one ended up in Canada. Across the Midwest, gas prices leapt at the pump. The speculation that the terrorist attack was due to Islamic extremists fueled the rise, and Michigan Governor John Engler tried to stop it.
There's no reason for gas to have gone up 30 cents at the pump, and I would hope that people would calm down and act responsibly.
Most people did act responsibly. All over the country, hundreds of Americans, worried about their wounded East Coast neighbors, lined up to give blood. The sentiments of these North Carolinians summed up the country's mood in a time of need.
My friends and I came here today because we figured at least this is some way we can really help.
I really didn't think twice. It was just the thing to do.
And our hearts and our prayers are with them, and it's just a little bit of something that somebody can do.
Finally, many Americans responded to the horror of this day with prayer, looking for answers to the incomprehensible and solace for the devastation.
About the death and the horror of this day, it seems to me so much is not known, not yet known. How many have died in New York City and in Washington, D.C.? Why did they do this? What happens next?
It is the question on everyone's mind tonight. What happens next, the day after America changed forever?
It's very hard to grasp a national metaphor for the public participation today, and it certainly is in this most religious of nations, where people take their religion seriously, where a very enormous percentage of Americans acknowledge participation in matters religious, whether going to church tonight. The people have dropped into churches today for all of the obvious reasons, but perhaps the national metaphor is, at this point, all the people in all the communities across the country wanting to give blood, because there's something of direct action about that. We had a representative from the National Emergency Response Team from the Red Cross here with us a short while ago, who was one of the people who has stated, as did the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City, that blood will be needed in the face of a general national shortage of blood. And all over the country, every report we've had from somewhere in the country today has indicated that people have gone to their local Red Cross and tried to contribute, or wanted to contribute, and did contribute blood. And there is indeed, I'm sorry, but I've forgotten the precise types that was so needed. I think it was O-type blood that was needed, because it is the most genuinely, easily distributed form of blood to people. As we wait for what we continue to believe here in New York City is still going to be a rush of victims perhaps. We keep hearing this from the trauma centers of people as the search and rescue teams begin to get to people who were trapped in the trade towers today. And as you know, the president had a long difficult day, if there's one single individual in the country to whom the nation historically looks on an occasion such as this, it is the president. The president was in Florida, then he was in Louisiana, then he was in Nebraska. He finally made it back to Washington late in the day, having moved around the country for all the obvious security reasons, because nobody knew at any time in the day whether this initial coordinated attack was larger, or whether the president was a target, or whether members of the Congress were a target, which is what's made it so hard, added the dimension of why it's been so hard for people around the country. The president finally got back to the White House today, did talk to the nation, and I hope we have the essence of it in this report from ABC's Barry Serafin.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks.
Whatever people's individual appraisal of the political record of George W. Bush, it is pretty clear, I think, what we're getting from around the country today, the president hit the mark. That where America looked out and saw the face of evil, this attack with totally indifferent to who was involved, innocent civilians, in every case, the heart of the military establishment, in one case, innocent passengers, the vast bulk of whom were civilians on board commercial aircraft today. The president said the world could look then at the United States and see the best of democracy at work, and he made these clear references on more than one occasion to the volunteer spirit in the country and the extraordinary effort at the Pentagon in Washington and at this catastrophe in New York City of the people who have done and continue to do their best to make a horrible situation better in any way they can. And in the ensuing hours since this attack occurred, whatever people thought in their first instinct, and however careful all of the people who talked about it were to avoid making prejudicial judgments about may who've done this, the character of Osama bin Laden, the very rich Saudi businessman, mastermind, the United States believes, of a number of terrorist acts, has gone right to the top of list of suspects. And I don't know of anybody who knows more about bin Laden outside the Intelligence Committee and maybe inside, or who's had anything like the contact with him that ABC's John Miller, who is here with us for most of the day, has had. And so John has put together this little package on Osama bin Laden at the end of this very long and difficult day, which of course does not end. So here's Miller's report.
And he was not shy about calculating the price in American lives if those demands were not met.
You will leave when the bodies of American soldiers and civilians are sent in the wooden boxes and coffins. That is when you will leave.
The FBI says bin Laden made good on his threats with truck bomb attacks at the U.S. embassies in Kenya and in Tanzania. 258 people were killed in the bombings, hundreds were injured. More than a dozen men with ties to bin Laden have been charged with carrying out those bombings.
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan because of the threat they present to our national security.
the United States launched a counterattack on bin Laden's bases in Afghanistan. But before the missiles hit, bin Laden and his inner circle were already in hiding. Recently, bin Laden denied to ABC News that he ordered the embassy attacks, but he commended the work of the bombers.
These are true men whom we respect and hold in the highest esteem.
Clearly, he is a role model for a lot of Islamic militants in the world today. I mean, his personal story is so compelling to them.
Bin Laden left his home in Saudi Arabia at the age of 19 to join the Muslims fighting the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Like many of the young fighters, he was religious and committed. Unlike any other, he came from a Saudi family that ran a construction empire worth $5 billion. Bin Laden's personal worth is estimated at $200 million.
Yet he sacrifices all of that to take up what he believes is a religious duty, an obligation to expel the atheistic invaders of a Muslim country.
We must use punishment to keep your evil away from Muslims, Muslim women and children.
To understand bin Laden's hatred for America, you have to put the U.S. in the context it is seen by many Muslims.
Americans impose themselves on everyone who believes in his religion and his rights. They accuse our children in Palestine of being terrorists, those children who have no weapons and have not yet even reached maturity.
We asked bin Laden about Somalia. The United States referred to the military operation in Somalia as a rescue mission to prevent genocide by warring tribes. But bin Laden simply viewed it as another invasion of an Islamic country. American intelligence agencies believe it was bin Laden who dispatched his personal brigades with rocket launchers to shoot down U.S. helicopters. 18 U.S. soldiers were killed. Bin Laden does not deny he had a role and revels in America's retreat from Somalia.
Our people realize more than before that the American soldier is a paper tiger that ran in defeat after a few blows. America forgot all about the hoopla and media propaganda and left dragging their corpses and their shameful defeat.
And in Saudi Arabia, another kind of warfare. In November 1995, a bomb exploded at the Saudi National Guard training center in Riyadh, killing 5 Americans. The bombers made videotape confessions saying they were inspired by bin Laden.
We look at these young men as great heroes and martyrs who followed the steps of the Prophet, peace be upon him. We called and they answered.
The U.S. Justice Department believes bin Laden is operating what is, in essence, an underground foundation where terrorists can apply for a grant. Bin Laden's resources are spread widely. He has other training camps in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and U.S. intelligence says small terrorist cells that have operated in cities around the world. The U.S. State Department says bin Laden also owns a chain of recruiting centers and guest houses like this one in Pakistan and others in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Ken Katzman is a former CIA analyst who has studied bin Laden.
His followers, his fighters are all over the Middle East, really. So you can't just get at him by hitting this one base, unless you get him personally, of course.
ABC's John Miller, who's been with us through much of the day, one of the few people we've ever, as I said, who's ever spent time with bin Laden in Afghanistan. And while we do not know, I think we re-emphasize, as virtually every security analyst has who we have talked to today, say we do not have any firm handle yet on who perpetrated this act today. This is a very obvious path out of the bin Laden connection to go down this many hours, or for that matter, almost immediately after an attack of this sort, though we continually remind ourselves we were wrong in calling it at the time of Oklahoma City. It's incomprehensible to most Americans, bin Laden's mind and the people who follow him. The suicide bomber's mentality and psychology is virtually impossible to penetrate for those of us who report on issues like this. But as several people in government today and who are engaged in the counter-terrorism campaign which the United States and other industrial nations, other nations I should say in general, have to wage at the moment, it is something the United States is going to have to better understand as time goes by, because part of the war against terrorism is understanding the mentality of terrorism. Force has its place, but so does understanding the mentality of the people who regard the United States, and in many cases Israel, the United States partner in the Middle East where so much of this is involved, have to understand what it is that moves them. Now, Lisa Stark, I thought we were going to give some time off, but Lisa is still on the telephone at least. And Lisa, tell us a little bit about the airline industry's pressure on the FAA at the moment about security.
What we're hearing, Peter, from sources close to the airline industry is that they are talking to the Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration about whether this nation should federalize security at the nation's airports. The sense is that today's events were a breach of national security, not just airport security, that it's time for the government to take over security at the airports with uniformed officers. Apparently, according to sources in the airline industry, the airlines have raised this issue. They have made this request of the federal government that national security is a government responsibility, and that's what's involved here. It is being talked about at government levels. Obviously, no decision has been made. This would be a wholesale change in how security is handled at U.S. airports, but this is under active discussion, apparently, at this time.
Thanks very much, Lisa Stark. None of us surprised, I think, to hear that news today. And this is the kind of thing which we think may appear in the form of proposed legislation in the Congress tomorrow. The Congress is going to be doing business, if not as usual. It's going to be doing business tomorrow. And beyond what we expect will be a unanimous support for the president at a time like this, there may well be various proposals as members of both the House and the Senate have ideas which they think are smart and worthy in terms of the counter-terrorism campaign, which the United States, everybody agrees today, is going to have to wage more vigorously. ABC's Barry Serafin is at the White House now on this very late-night duty, Barry. And just, if you will, bring us up to date. I gather the White House is locked down. Has the president gone to bed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
The lights are out, Peter. There is a lid, as they say, at the White House until tomorrow. The president tonight, after his speech, met with National Security Council members. He's expected to meet tomorrow morning with congressional leaders. And as you noted, Congress is expected tomorrow to pass a resolution supporting the president and denouncing these terrorist acts. You're certainly going to be hearing more of that name, Osama bin Laden, in congressional briefings, high-level briefings through the day and through the evening tonight. Our sources all tell us that they've been told that many things at this point point to Osama bin Laden. Tomorrow, it's business not quite as usual in this town. Obviously, the grisly, difficult work is going to go on at the Pentagon. Government offices will indeed be open again tomorrow, but only essential personnel. There is still a state of emergency in this city. And Peter, there's a little bit of fallout coming out of all of this in another way. As you know, about a week and a half from now, there's a meeting scheduled here of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And it's been expected that tens of thousands of demonstrators were going to show up. Tonight, the District of Columbia Police are recommending that that meeting be postponed. I think partly because there's a feeling that this city and the country will still be in mourning, and partly because no one really has the stomach for that kind of confrontation in the wake of this.
That's a very interesting development. Thanks very much, Barry Serafin, because everybody recalls the recent meetings in Genoa and the meetings a couple of years ago in Seattle, where at the World Trade Conference there, that there are a great many people in the world today who are angry and dissatisfied and frustrated with the established order. And in every case where there's been a meeting. In the case of Genoa in Italy, it was the leaders of the 8 industrial nations. In Seattle, it was the World Trade Center. There was a meeting in Calgary in Canada. All of these meetings have been disrupted in major fashion now by people frustrated, angry, mad at the established political order in the world today, who believe that many people in the world are simply being left out and not taken into account by the industrial nations. The world is, I don't want to overstate it, but the world is in many places boiling at a variety of levels tonight. And of course, the American temper is up tonight for all of the obvious and understandable reasons that the United States has been attacked. And if you have to read your newspapers tomorrow, you have to listen to the radio, watch television, stay with us in order to grasp all of the detail, much of which I hope we've been able to get in our coverage so far. But as you look at the early editions of just the Washington newspapers, they're a reflection of what is is being said in various other places around the country. There is anger in all of the newspapers. There is this phrase, declaration of war, used in newspapers all across the country today. There's an understanding on behalf of the editorial writers that we've seen so far that there is a need for the United States to be patient and understand clearly what is going on here, but that there is a widespread sentiment in the country, supported very much by a poll we did earlier today, to strike back if the country can ascertain which individuals are involved or individual organizations, and to strike back. There is very early support for that if other governments are involved, so that there's no doubt that there is a sense of war as well as tragedy in the nation tonight. Our coverage on ABC News and at abcnews.com and in radio will continue. We're going to have a quick change of shift here, but ABC News coverage will continue, period. Thank you very much. I'm Peter Jennings. Elizabeth Vargas is here. Elizabeth Vargas.
This is an ABC News special report.
So Elizabeth Vargas is going to take over the anchor chair here for a spell while teams of our reporters and I go away and try to
some much needed.
Well, it's not the rest issue here, quite frankly. It's important to get away and appraise what is happening in the country from a broader perspective than just sitting here, as you will find in the next several hours. But thank you very much. And thank everybody else at ABC News who's made a contribution to our understanding today. We're all in awe of the effort that the firefighters and the police are making, military is making at the Pentagon. So you...
Indeed.
Yeah, you've seen it from the outside, now you have to work it from the inside.
Thanks,
Elizabeth, very much.
This is, as Peter just said, ABC News continuing coverage of that terrorist attack on the United States. I am Elizabeth Vargas, and the grim task of searching for victims of the attack on New York's World Trade Center is continuing around the clock. Hundreds of volunteers and medical workers are right now on the scene to help look for survivors and for bodies. The National Guard has also been mobilized. It was a terrifying sight yesterday morning as cameras captured one of the two hijacked jetliners that slammed into the World Trade Center towers and burst into flames. The attacks eventually caused the collapse of both towers. At the Pentagon, where another hijacked jetliner struck, officials now believe as many as 800 people were killed. Late into the night, flames could still be seen billowing from the building. And right now we're going to go to ground zero. Ground zero at this hour does remain the devastating scene at New York's World Trade Center. ABC's Bill Blakemore joins us live from Lower Manhattan. Bill, have they been able to extricate any victims, any survivors so far from this wreckage?
Well, we understand from Mayor Giuliani that they have pulled out a couple of Port Authority police officers who were trapped in the wreckage. That was a little bit earlier this evening. And we have seen a great deal more of activity here this evening from the large search and rescue operations that have been staging here throughout the day. We've seen a great deal of heavy machinery moving up and down here as they're beginning to move some of the rubble from around the outsides of the base of the trade towers. But as perhaps you can tell from the scene behind me there, there's still a great deal of smoke and dust coming up from the base of the trade towers themselves. People just coming just now told us it's still on fire there. So there's still a great deal of problem with heat in the center of the scene. And a couple of buildings around the edge are also still on fire. They're starting their search and rescue operations with a little bit of good news on the periphery, but there's still basic problems before they can get the full operation underway.
Buildings in the area were still safe. Have they been able to establish if, in fact, everything is stable in that area?
In fact, we're still hearing reports that a couple of buildings appear that they may not be stable, that something else could still come down. There's a couple of areas the police are making sure nobody is getting near. There's an enormous logistics problem because of all of this heavy machinery down here. The lights are out, and on the dark streets to the left and to the right of me here, every now and then we see large motorcades of big machinery moving by with their lights as the people coordinating this try to get the right machinery in the right place. But beyond that, they're really waiting for morning, which is a few hours away yet before they can really see clearly what the devastation is.
And I know that must be an incredibly eerie sight down there. We've been seeing some pictures coming into our newsroom here of the smoke, of the wreckage, of the flames. Can you describe what that's like?
Well, eerie is indeed the right word. We have the acrid smell in the air of smoke, the dust that's just everywhere and settling more and more on the outlying streets around here. Because they've had to turn off the gas and the electricity in the center of town here for firefighting reasons, there is this bizarre warlike feel. There's only the harsh light that comes from the floodlights that they've managed to move in. Beyond that, we have tired, exhausted groups of rescue workers and policemen standing around, some of them who've come out, some of them waiting to go in.
Thank you so much for that report. Stay there, stay tuned. We'll be checking back with you in just a few moments. President Bush was in Florida when the attacks occurred. He returned to the White House late in the day, and we're going now to ABC News White House correspondent Josh Gersting. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning, Elizabeth. The president did spend much of the day crisscrossing the country for security reasons, and then, as you said, he returned to the White House. He took to the airwaves just after about 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, speaking to the American people from the Oval Office. He said the American way of life and our very freedom had come under attack. He referred to the attacks today as evil, despicable acts of terror. The president tried to give voice to what he said was a quiet, unyielding anger being felt by many Americans. The president said the acts of mass murder we saw today may have shattered steel, but cannot shatter the steel of American resolve. He referred to the heroism of the rescue workers and vowed that those responsible for these attacks would be brought to justice. And in what was perhaps the most interesting comment, said no distinction would be made between the terrorists and those who harbor them. That quite possibly a message to, say, a country like Afghanistan, which has given shelter to a man like Osama bin Laden. And the president wrapped up his remarks with a Bible verse from Psalm 23, saying, "Though I've walked through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me." A very somber, a very mournful, and a very prayerful President Bush tonight, Elizabeth.
Jim, there's been a great deal of effort by both President Bush and members of Congress to send a message loud and clear to anyone in the world that this government is up and operating.
Oh, the president made that quite clear tonight, and we expect tomorrow morning that as many government agencies as possible will get back into operation. We expect President Bush to meet with congressional leaders. White House officials describing the president's emotions as even-keeled, saying he's been exhibiting steely resolve. They do not use the word anger, just preferring to say tough determination and resolve. The president obviously adjusting his schedule for the next few days. He will remain here in Washington, and they say he will have events that reflect the gravity and solemnity of what took place in the last 24 hours.
All right, Josh Gersting, thank you so much. Stand by for us, if you will. There were two attacks, as we've been telling you. One was at the World Trade Center. The other was at the Pentagon. And despite heavy damage at the Pentagon, it is scheduled to open today, even as officials deal with what appears to be a staggering death toll. ABC's Jim Sciutto is live at the Pentagon. Jim, they've already updated it from 100 to possibly 800 fatalities.
Well, Elizabeth, there have been a lot of estimates of casualties, but there was a press conference here with the Arlington fire chief a short time ago, and he actually backed off that 800 figure. Earlier in the day, he'd given an estimate of between 100 and 800 dead possibly here at the Pentagon, but he said a short time ago that that 800 figure is a high-end estimate, that really all they know now is that 67 people who were on that plane definitely died. From there, they're really just speculating at this point. The Pentagon is still on fire. Just a few moments ago, we saw flames breaking through the roof of the Pentagon as the firemen do what is called trenching, where they break open the roof to get access to the flames. When they do that, it provides more oxygen. The flames jump up. But you can see them again behind me now spraying the roof with water. As you mentioned before, though, this is still an active building. We received a call just about a half hour ago from someone in the Joint Chiefs of Staff Crisis Action Team, and he said just on his team there are 500 to 1,000 people at work right now in the building. And tomorrow morning the Pentagon is going to be open for business. A small part of it, about a third of the building, is going to be closed off, but still it's going to be in business tomorrow, and it is in business right now, people working. They say that the search and rescue for victims is being suspended now while they try to control the flames, one, and two, make the building safe, because this is an unsteady building. They're peeling away the layers to make sure that the search and rescue workers are not in danger as they look possibly for survivors. The fire chief saying again in this press briefing that he still has hope that there are survivors inside, but he says that it could take as long as a week, search and rescue, and also search and recovery of any bodies. Elizabeth.
All right, Jim Sciutto, stand by. We'll check in with you as the evening progresses as well, or the morning now. As Americans watched in horror yesterday, so did most of the other people around the world. ABC's Jim Wooten has the view from overseas.
As word moved across the Atlantic to here in Europe and beyond, the first focus was on Afghanistan, where officials of the Taliban government not only condemned the attacks, but insisted for whatever it's worth that Osama bin Laden is forbidden to use the country as a base for terrorism, and is in no position to do so, though he's believed to have planned previous terrorism from there. In the Middle East,
we are completely shocked. Completely shocked.
Yasser Arafat offered condolences from the Palestinian people to America, a sympathy not shared by more militant Palestinians in Jerusalem, or these Muslims celebrating in Lebanon. Generally, from leaders of Palestinian militant groups, there were denials of responsibility, but condemnations of U.S. policy in the region.
We call upon the American administration to review their attitude and their policy towards the Palestinian question, because this policy arouses the anger and the hatred of our people.
Russian President Vladimir Putin extended his condolences, then at U.S. request canceled major military maneuvers by the Russian Air Force. There was heightened security at American embassies around the world, including Berlin, where German citizens brought flowers to the gates as a memorial, and as air traffic into and out of London's Heathrow Airport was delayed, flights to the U.S. were canceled indefinitely, British Prime Minister Tony Blair had this to say.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together to fight it together and eradicate this evil completely from our world.
That was ABC's Jim Wooten on the worldwide reaction to what happened yesterday morning here in New York City and in Washington, D.C., recapping the latest on this unprecedented terrorist attack on the United States. A massive and grim search for survivors and bodies is underway in New York after two hijacked jetliners slammed into the World Trade Center's Twin Towers. The impact of the crashes eventually caused both of the 110-story towers to collapse, to implode. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, mayor of New York City, says the number of casualties could be, quote, more than most of us can bear. Officials say establishing the final death toll could take weeks. At the Pentagon, investigators fear as many as 800 people were killed, although that figure may be downgraded a bit, as we just heard from Jim Sciutto on the scene there. Another hijacked jetliner slammed into the building shortly after the two jetliners slammed into the World Trade Center towers. The military is responding by putting its forces around the world on the highest alert, and an aircraft carrier due to come home from the Persian Gulf War has been ordered to remain in that area indefinitely. In an address from the Oval Office, President Bush said thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. He vowed to find those responsible and bring them to justice. There were swears, and here is some more information on what is happening in Washington and in New York today. Congress and federal offices in the nation's capital will, in fact, be open this morning. They are trying to send a very strong message to those around the world that this government is open and operating. However, stock markets will be closed closed, and there will only be limited postal deliveries around the country. Schools in both Washington and New York City have canceled classes for today, and all airline flights have been canceled until at least noon Eastern time tomorrow, something that has never been done by the FAA shortly after those hijackings and those crashes. For those of you seeking information on family members who may have been victims, a hotline has been set up. That number is 1-800-331-0075. Again, 1-800-331-0075. If you have any information on the terrorist activity, you can go to the website set up by the FBI. That website is www.ifcfbi.gov. And there were, of course, many immediate and strong, swift demands for a response to yesterday's attacks. Among them making the demands, former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, who spoke earlier this evening with ABC's Peter Jennings.
Afghanistan has been in a country in absolute turmoil, just riddled with violence for more than a decade, and the United States was party to that in many cases. What could the United States do now to a government in Afghanistan that would make life any worse for them than it is already?
By destroying that government, or by destroying the infrastructure of that government. Look, I understand that particularly in a case like Afghanistan, you have 150 years of this kind of instability. That doesn't mean, what it does mean, I think, though, is that if we're going to judge these issues precisely with the kinds of questions you've asked, much as they have to be asked, and we then decide because there is not a lot that can be done, that we shouldn't do anything, I think that's the wrong approach. And I think if the terrorists and the governments who house them are made to pay prices for it, and again, I can't believe that the government in Kabul would take kindly to having its government buildings blown up under them or over them. But I think there are things we could do.
You do mean, I gather then, among other things, attacking the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul,
if necessary, yes.
where the Taliban,
yes,
from which the Taliban rules, and perhaps a city like Kandahar, large city in the south.
If necessary, if we think it's, if we think it will make the point.
Cities.
Sir?
Full-scale attacks on Afghanistan cities.
I would do it. Now, look, I understand. I'm one person saying this, and everyone else will be horrified by it. But the point I'm trying to make here is, I think we now need to understand that this is a war. We will have lost some tens of thousands of people, I suspect, and I think we must make it clear to the rest of the world that we're going to be, if you will, somewhat irrational in our response.
I mean neither to agree nor disagree with you. I hope you understand that, first of all, sir. But you are suggesting that the United States now fight on the same level as the people who have committed these acts against the United States.
You betcha. When you fight a war, that is what you do.
Very strong remarks from former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, speaking earlier this evening with ABC's Peter Jennings. We want to put up one more time that website in case anybody out there has any information that might help them find out who was in fact behind this attack. The website for any tips like that, any information to the government set up by the FBI is www.ifccfbi.com. And again, there's a 1-800 number that you can call to find out any information about family members who might have been victims, friends or family. Osama bin Laden quickly emerged as a prime suspect in this attack, and Senator Orrin Hatch says intelligence officials told him people on at least one of yesterday's airplanes appear to have been associated with Osama bin Laden. U.S. officials have long feared what bin Laden might do. Here's ABC's Brian Ross with more.
Commercial airlines have been a part of many of the terrorist schemes tied to today's prime suspect, Osama bin Laden. According to federal court records filed by prosecutors in New York, terrorists working for bin Laden have often received training as pilots, some with U.S. pilots' licenses for large jets. In fact, some pilots say the turn the second plane seems to have made in hitting the World Trade Center would be difficult for an amateur to carry out.
I think we have to start looking for people who were trained to fly these planes, people who knew what they were doing, because no pilot would ever fly in and destroy everybody.
As for bin Laden, after tracking him through his cell phone for several years, American intelligence officials reportedly lost track of him last year.
People at NSA told me that they had been able to eavesdrop on Osama bin Laden for
for a long period of time. And then all of a sudden, it all went silent. They weren't able to track him anymore.
Federal prosecutors say bin Laden has a pattern of making good on his threats. And just 3 weeks ago, the Middle East Broadcasting Company reported the latest warning from bin Laden and his followers that the coming weeks would bear significant surprises during which American and Israeli interests worldwide would be targeted.
Men must send their sons to the battlefields and the fighting quarters so that they can be prepared militarily for the religion of Muhammad to triumph.
That was 3 weeks ago in the Afghan desert. Brian Ross, ABC News, New York.
We are going to turn now to pictures of the search and rescue operations underway at this moment at the site of the collapsed World Trade Center towers, as close to ground zero as our crews can get, where hundreds, perhaps thousands of emergency workers are braving extraordinarily dangerous conditions to fight fires and to search for any signs of life. We have heard reports that a number of survivors have been, in fact, pulled from the rubble. Other reports we've been getting in are that people were actually trapped inside some of that rubble and were using cell phones to call 911, to call for rescuers, to call for help. As you can see, an eerie scene in lower Manhattan. There is no electricity in much of this area. The area is lit by portable floodlights that they have brought down. Whole blocks worth of bulldozers and trying to clear away this wreckage. It could take weeks, however, they say, to find out the exact number of victims in this disaster. Less than 2 hours after the hijacked jets plowed into both those towers, the two towers crumbled to the ground. ABC's Robert Krulwich explains why.
Why did the towers collapse as quickly and as suddenly as they did? Engineers from the original firm that built the towers told ABC they can only guess at this point, but they believe that the collisions themselves, the plane hitting building number 1 and the plane that smashed into building number 2, by themselves, they did not cause the collapse. It was the fire, they say, the intense fire and heat from the explosions that brought the buildings down. Temperatures inside could have built up to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, steel loses its strength and steel beams connect every floor to the outside walls. As it got hotter, the beams got weaker, and the hot air inside began to push and press against the outside walls until the outside walls just buckled, snapped, and released the top floor, which fell onto the floor below, and the entire building sinks in a straight vertical, the floors falling faster and faster down, until you notice that every floor in the building is gone. Viewed from another angle, you can see the same thing. Notice the aerial stays vertical, just stays straight as it sinks into the building. There's no buckling or tipping, just straight down. And this happened in both buildings. The first tower, too, stayed straight as it went down, each floor falling neatly on top of the other. So the reason the towers went so quickly is because all the floors were literally hanging onto the skin. And once the skin went, the buildings went too. Robert Krulwich, ABC News.
And a terrible sight indeed, bringing you up to date with the very latest of what we know. Hundreds of volunteers and medical workers have converged at the scene of what used to be the World Trade Center towers to search for victims of yesterday's terrorist attacks. The Trade Center's twin towers are now just mounds of rubble, as we just saw moments ago in that live shot, after two hijacked jetliners slammed into each of the towers. It was a terrifying sight yesterday morning as cameras actually captured the second of the jets crashing into the tower and then bursting into flames. Cameras were trained on them, obviously, after the first jetliner. Absolutely chilling. Some 50,000 people worked in the World Trade Center every day. We have no idea how many of those people were there at this hour, how many people were able to be evacuated after the first jet slammed into the first tower. At the Pentagon, officials fear hundreds were killed when another hijacked jetliner struck there. The military is responding by putting its forces all over the world on the very highest alert, and an aircraft carrier due to come home from the Persian Gulf has been ordered to remain in the area indefinitely. We are now going to go to Bill Blakemore, who is down at the ground zero where the crews are working so diligently, so hard to try and find any victims, any survivors. Bill, what kind of progress are they making?
We haven't heard of any other than 2 or 3 people being pulled from the rubble so far. There have been a number of the search and rescue workers who've worked their way back up here after their shift ended, covered with dust, who've talked about how depressing it is to try to dig through 10 feet of ash and rubble and then just find another bit of metal and then have to start all over again, finding nothing. The really sobering thought, of course, Elizabeth, is the fact that down there at the end of the street is where all of the bodies are lying. We don't know how many it is, that people are saying could be in the tens of thousands.
This can often be a very delicate task in cases like this. The wreckage itself could collapse at any moment. How difficult a job is this, and how hard is it to even get close to some of this wreckage?
Well, first of all, a couple of buildings around the edge of it are still burning, and we can see some of the smoke still piling up from some of those fires. Some of that, of course, is also dust from some of the demolition work as they're trying to get some of the debris cleared away. So they've got that difficulty. They've also got the difficulty of the fact that the trade towers seem to have completely disintegrated, virtually completely disintegrated as they fell down upon themselves. There's almost nothing left of any of the floors. So they have a great density of wreckage as well.
All right, Bill Blakemore, thank you so much for that update down at Ground Zero at what was the World Trade Centers and what is now the scene of a massive crime scene and a terrible national tragedy. Members of Congress were briefed on the very latest developments last night, and ABC's Barry Serafin joins us now from Washington. Barry, I assume they know more than we do at this point.
They certainly do, Elizabeth, but at this point, there's no definite finger pointing, but they're being told the same thing we've been hearing, that many things at this point point to Osama bin Laden. Members of Congress tonight, like the president, expressed resolve and determination to find and punish those responsible, and determination that freedom will prevail. Tomorrow, to back all that up, Congress will adopt a resolution which will support the president and also denounce these terrorist acts. Congressional leaders are expected to meet with the president tomorrow morning. And there's some talk in coming days of a joint session of Congress, perhaps addressed by the president.
Indeed, we've heard so many members of Congress, the president himself, members of his administration talk about the importance of sending the message that it's going to take a heck of a lot more to stop the United States government from operating. But tomorrow, when they do go on to, when they are meeting and getting these briefings, what can they legitimately hope to accomplish? I mean, the Pentagon is burning, and then obviously we don't have a lot of information yet on who is responsible for the attack. So, Barry, what is this more symbolic, the business they have planned tomorrow?
Yeah, it's certainly meant to send a message, Elizabeth. Exactly that the government is still functioning, that the U.S. is still standing. And it's also true that that's one of the reasons that government agencies will be back open tomorrow, even the Pentagon. But they won't be operating probably at full strength, and we still have a state of emergency here. We have National Guardsmen, 300 of them in the District of Columbia, 300 more in Virginia, and by the way, about 3,000 of them by later today in New York, which will be patrolling streets, keeping security, keeping traffic moving, and maintaining a presence.
We have a look already, Barry, at the first headlines of the morning newspaper from the Washington Post. I believe we have a graphic, or can we get that up there? No, I guess we don't. We'll be getting that. There it is. Terrorists hijacked 4 airliners, 2 destroy World Trade Center, 1 hits Pentagon, 4th crashes. That 4th jet, of course, referring to the United Airlines jet that crashed in Pennsylvania. This has got to be a surreal evening there as well, Barry. I mean, we had members of Congress momentarily evacuated. Obviously, the president hopscotching around the country in search of safe haven as well as information. Finally, everybody converging back on the Capitol tonight. It must be equally surreal there.
It was an eerie day here, Elizabeth. You know, in a way, it looked like this city looks like during a blizzard. This morning, traffic was choking the streets because other streets had been closed off around sensitive buildings. But for most of the afternoon, the city was just empty, just quiet, except for police and the occasional siren. And tonight, it's much the same way. This is clearly still a city in shock.
All right, Barry Serafin in Washington, D.C. The same could be said as well for New York City, where the streets are practically deserted. It's something very unusual in the city that never sleeps. Very little traffic. People are basically being told by the mayor here to stay inside, to stay close to information, to not come down if they can avoid it at all costs. But back in the Capitol, on Capitol Hill steps just last night, members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, stood side by side, said they will stand as Americans together to condemn the attacks and support retaliation. They then did something very unusual and joined together in a patriotic song. Let's take a look.
Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
We can see there a symbolic gesture by members of Congress standing together to sing a song of patriotism to show that they are, in fact, standing together, united in this against this attack. To recap, 4 commercial jetliners, 2 United Airlines jets, 2 American Airlines jets, 757s, 767s, in a well-coordinated terrorist attack hijacked this morning. 2 of the jetliners crashing into the 2 twin towers in New York City. Those twin towers then collapsing about an hour later. Shortly afterwards, massive casualties are expected. It could be weeks before we know how many people might have been killed or injured in that attack. As well, another jetliner crashed into the Pentagon. And again, there we expect to hear about hundreds of casualties as well. A 4th jet crashed in the countryside in Pennsylvania. It is believed that that jet, the hijackers on board that jet, were aiming for Camp David. But as of now, the massive rescue and search efforts are going on down in New York City at the base of this island. It is complete chaos down there, as we've been able to see from our cameras on the scene. They are hoping to find survivors. As of now, so far, only a small handful. And again, rescuers have been working around the clock. Among those feared killed in this explosion, in this terrorist attack, were over 300 New York City firefighters who were in the process of trying to evacuate one of those 2 twin towers. Also, several police officers, many of the top brass of the fire department, were on the scene at the time that the towers collapsed after the jets had crashed into them, and they are feared dead as well. This is a devastating, obviously, terrorist attack. President Bush took to the airwaves a few hours ago, vowing to find who is responsible and vowing swift and strong retaliation. So once again, this is ABC News continuing coverage of the terrorist attacks on the United States. And as we've been saying, that difficult and grisly task of searching for bodies and survivors is intensifying at the site of the World Trade Center. Many of the victims are buried beneath the rubble of the twin 110-story towers. They collapsed yesterday, right after those jetliners slammed into them. Cameras did capture that horrifying moment when the second of those 2 jets crashed into the tower and burst into flames. Again, a terrible, terrible sight. Some 50,000 people normally work at the World Trade Center every day. We have no idea how many people were actually in the towers at the time of those 2 explosions that you're looking at right now. Officials say determining a final death toll could, in fact, take weeks. Again, at the Pentagon, still recapping, officials fear hundreds were killed when another hijacked jetliner struck there. The military is responding by putting its forces around the world on the highest state of alert. There has been no credible claim of responsibility yet for any of these attacks, but federal authorities have identified suspected terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden as a prime suspect. He has vowed to do devastation, to wreak havoc on the United States in the past, and this was clearly a stunningly well-orchestrated terrorist attack. 4 hijackings happening in the span of 2 hours or 1 hour this morning, and many law enforcement officials still struggling to figure out how this all happened. We can go now to ABC's Josh Gerstein, who is in Washington, D.C. Josh, the President, Congress all showing a united front and vowing that business will continue and swift revenge.
Well, they certainly are vowing swift revenge and a return to normalcy, but it was anything but a normal day for President Bush he began his day in Sarasota, Florida at an education event, a fairly routine event for the president, when he first got word of the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center. And then when the second plane went into the World Trade Center buildings, it became clear to everyone that this was no accident. This was a terrorist attack. And then, of course, word of the attack on the Pentagon and the other planes going down. The president spent the day hopscotching, going around the country, very, very unusual. He took off out of Sarasota, Florida, after making a few brief remarks, flew to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, was there for some time, had a meeting, had a conference call from the general's quarters there at Barksdale Air Force Base, then got back on Air Force One under very tight security and flew on from there to Nebraska, Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, which is a base that was intended for use during the Cold War as a hideout in the event of a nuclear doomsday. He landed at Offutt Air Force Base and went into a very, very small building, which we're told allowed him to descend into an underground bunker where he held a full national security meeting with officials back here in Washington. And at that point, he then returned, flew back to Washington. His advisors very eager to get him back here to show that the government was trying to return to normal. And indeed, this evening, things returned somewhat to normal at the White House after being evacuated for most of the day. The White House staff was allowed back in, and the press was allowed back in this evening, although they have now closed the White House for the night. It's right behind me, and they've turned the lights off, but they say they will be back in business first thing in the morning.
And that
Elizabeth?
is reassuring. All right, Josh Gerstein, thank you so much for that report. In his speech from the Oval Office, Mr. Bush sought to calm a country shaken by unprecedented violence. Let's listen.
Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
President Bush speaking from the Oval Office a few hours ago, seeking to calm a country obviously shaken by the worst terrorist attack suffered on U.S. soil in our country's history, vowing, in fact, to find those responsible for the attacks and bring them to justice. A fourth plane hijacked yesterday did not hit a building, as we said to you a few moments ago, but it did crash outside Pittsburgh, killing all 45 people on board. It was United Airlines Flight 93, and passenger Mark Bingham was able to call his mother on his cell phone from a locked bathroom to tell her that the plane was being hijacked. Bingham's mother, Alice Hoagland, spoke earlier with Peter Jennings.
He said, I just wanted to let you know that I love you. He was repeating that same thing he had told Kathy a moment before. I told him, we love you, Mark. And he said, I'm on a flight, Flight 93, United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco, and there are 3 guys that have taken over the flight, and they say they have a bomb. And I'm calling you from the airphone on the plane, meaning not his cell phone, I guess. I found out since that he was sitting in the last part of first class and that the flight was fairly light, not very many passengers, 45 people aboard. So he may well be able to take a proactive part in that, and they intended to do is target. I certainly hope so anyway.
Ms. Hoagland, I hate interviews like this at this moment, and I'm sure you are suffering in ways that we cannot imagine. Did your son say anything else to you about the circumstances on board the flight?
No, I wasn't able to be. He was cut off. Can you hear me all right?
I can indeed.
The plane, the phone went dead after a few seconds. I got the impression that he was being distracted badly by something going on around him. I didn't hear anything except the sort of confusion. I didn't hear any explosions, any yelling, just voices, and then seemed quite distracted about something, quite calm voice, though. He was a very composed fellow. And then he repeated that he loved us. He emphasized to me that what he was telling me was true. I told him I believed him, that we loved him, and the phone went dead.
Terrible, terrible news from the mother of Mark Bingham, one of the passengers on board one of the 4 commercial airline jets that were hijacked this morning. Several of those passengers on many of those airplanes were, in fact, able to use their cell phones. Many of them were reported on the phone when they called loved ones that they had been hijacked. Many of them had been herded to the back of the plane. They reported to loved ones that hijackers had, in many cases, attacked, stabbed flight attendants with knives that they had somehow managed to bring on board, something that is now going to be, the FBI will investigate as a tremendous security breach. That later on, in one case, the pilot of the aircraft was taken to the back of the airplane, according to some reports, but several people were able to, in those terrifying moments when I'm sure they knew something very terrible was on its way to happening, were able to call somebody, loved ones, on their cell phone and talk with them. Well, after a day of virtual lockdown, the nation's capital does try to resume some of its normal activity today. ABC's Barry Serafin has been in Washington all evening. Barry, I know that we've already begun hearing calls for swift and severe retribution. What is the mood like on Capitol Hill among lawmakers and the White House administration?
I think the mood is the same at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, Elizabeth. It's grim, it's determined. There's certainly some simmering anger there. Congress later today is going to pass a resolution denouncing these acts, supporting the president. There's probably also going to be a lot of talk on Capitol Hill about better intelligence gathering by this country and probably about better airline security in this country.
In fact, there's been a lot of talk already on why on earth we didn't have any clue, apparently, that these attacks were going to happen. Something this well orchestrated took an enormous amount of planning and preparation by whoever is behind this attack. And there's already a lot of finger pointing going on about why we didn't get any sort of clue this was about to happen.
A lot of the intelligence professionals are saying the United States is the best in the world at technical intelligence gathering, scooping up information from the sky, in effect, but not so good nowadays in human intelligence. That is, people on the ground, informants on the ground. And I think that's going to be a lot of what you're hearing in coming days here.
And in fact, the way we fly in this country could change dramatically. Security, that sort of thing, that changes that could be happening at the airports?
Security is going to change once they resume flights, which could be as early as noon today. There's certainly, you won't be able to check in bags at curbside anymore. There's going to be a lot more security all along the way, including some random ID checks.
All right, Barry Serafin, thank you for checking in with us from our nation's capital, recapping the very latest on this unprecedented terrorist attack on the United States. A massive and grim search for survivors and bodies is underway in New York City after 2 hijacked jetliners, one an American Airlines jet, the other a United Airlines jet, slammed into the World Trade Center's Twin Towers. The fires set off by the crashes eventually caused both of the 110-story towers to collapse. Officials fear as many as 300 firefighters may be among the casualties. They were apparently on the scene after the first jetliner crashed into the first tower, trying to evacuate people who are working in those buildings. And because they were there going in to rescue and to help people out, they too might have been victimized when the second jetliner crashed into, and then the second tower, and then when both towers eventually collapsed. But they say establishing a final death toll in this disaster at the World Trade Center location could take weeks. In the meantime, at the Pentagon, investigators fear hundreds of people were killed when another hijacked jetliner slammed into that building. The military is responding by putting its forces around the world on the very highest alert, and an aircraft carrier due to come home from the Persian Gulf has been ordered to remain in that area indefinitely. Obviously, the speculation being if there is any sort of retribution, any retaliation when we figure out who is behind the attack, perhaps that vessel will be in place for that. In an address from the Oval Office, President Bush said thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. He vowed to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. Indeed, we are already hearing quite a bit of talk from many people on Capitol Hill. Peter Jennings earlier this evening interviewing former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, vowing swift revenge, said this is war. It's been an act of war. You respond to war swiftly and severely. Here is some of what's happening around the country today. Congress and federal offices in the nation's capital will, in fact, be open this morning, as we've been hearing from our reporters on the scene, even as the Pentagon is on fire and the search for victims goes on. The Pentagon will, in fact, be open for business. However, the stock markets will be closed, and there will only be limited postal deliveries nationwide. Schools in both Washington and New York City have canceled classes for today, and all airline flights remain canceled until at least noon Eastern time. The FAA apparently shutting everything down once it became clear that there was this orchestrated terrorist attack happening involving 4 hijacked jetliners, all in the span of about an hour yesterday morning, shutting down something it's never done, shutting down the entire country's airspace. For anyone seeking information on family members who may have been victims, a hotline has been set up. That number is 1-800-331-0075. You can call that to find out if anybody you know or care about is involved in this attack. And if you have any information on terrorist activity, you can go to the website set up by the FBI. That website is www.ifccfbi.com. You see that website, .gov, pardon me. www.ifccfbi.gov is the website the FBI has set up. We're going to go now to ABC's Bill Blakemore, who's been very close to ground zero for most of the evening down in lower Manhattan, where the devastation has been amazing. Rescue crews are working in impossible conditions trying to find survivors. Bill, any update, any more survivors found?
Not that we know of so far. The big problem is an enormous amount of dust and the fact that they still cannot get the fires out. We can see against the dark night sky the smoke coming from 2 of the large buildings that are just to the west of the trade towers. They've been burning all day. We were watching them burn from before noon today. They've tried to get up into the buildings next to them to get streams of water onto them. But they're still having an awful lot of trouble with that heat, and the heat also in the very center of the base of where the 2 trade towers were. You can probably see some of the smoke down at the end of the street, very often obscuring what little of the wreckage we can see from here, the twisted wreckage. But the search and rescue operations are beginning to move around the periphery. We're beginning to see some of the rubble moved out by front-end loaders in some of the trucks. And every couple of hours, another shift of firemen comes past us, completely covered with dust.
And Bill, how quickly was the city and the National Guard, I'm assuming or supposing, how quickly were they able to get all of those bulldozers and backhoes that are so necessary to move this massive amount of wreckage?
We saw that all accumulating by late afternoon. I haven't myself seen any of the National Guard yet, but by late afternoon there were dozens of fire trucks, these enormous pieces of heavy machinery like the front-end loaders coming on trailers, some of them. They were all in position here in these side streets out behind where the trade towers stood not so long ago. And at first there was a bit of traffic jam out here and real gridlock as the men in charge of coordinating all of this effort tried to figure out how to get things into position. But that's all been cleared up pretty much now. They closed down the city completely. There's also no electricity here except for the floodlights they've brought in, but there's certainly no civilian traffic here, so they finally have that under control. Of course, there's a very grim job ahead.
A grim job indeed, and it could be weeks. Thank you, Bill Blakemore, for that report down from lower Manhattan near ground zero of this disaster near the World Trade Center Twin Towers where they once stood. They say it could be weeks before we know the extent of the casualties, the extent of how many people killed and injured. The Navy's Atlantic Fleet has sent aircraft carriers, guided missile cruisers, and destroyers into the waters off New York City and Washington, D.C. The Navy has also deployed a warship to patrol off the coast of Seattle. ABC's Neil Karlinski is there.
In Seattle, a Navy frigate armed with anti-aircraft weapons steamed into position near downtown in Elliott Bay. Throughout this city, life as normal simply stopped.
They came on and said that they were evacuating and please leave immediately.
Downtown, several buildings were evacuated. Even the city's famous Space Needle was closed indefinitely for fear it too could be a target. Children were kept in school, but the day was anything but normal as the smallest of students tried to understand what was happening. On the water, ferry service, on alert for car bombs, stopped service to all but individual passengers.
I asked the American people to join me.
Many of those who saw the images before leaving for work this morning, like this woman, stayed home, disgusted by the pictures before them.
I just woke up to it. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't believe it. I have so many friends in New York, and it's just...
It's going to be a couple of minutes. We'll be over to help you, okay?
Others, desperate to help any way possible, simply flooded blood banks.
I had to do something. For that report, we now have